Chapter 851. By the time the scorching sun battleship disappeared in the space, the crater on the planet had turned to the side facing away from the permanent star. The bottom of the crater had no sunlight and was extremely cold to begin with, and the temperature was unimaginably low at the moment. The gloomy old man opened his eyes slowly and looked at the dark and gloomy space above, a hint of bewilderment and shock showing in his grayish eyes. Previously, he had sensed an extremely powerful and sharp divine sense, which had a very clear warning within it. He couldn't figure out how the other party had discovered him, and he couldn't figure out why the other party's sword wills were so powerful even though they had just ascended not long ago. The planet was actually very far away from the scorching sun battleship. Even the imaging system on the battleship couldn't capture a clear image of it. There was another reason why Jingjiu could see the crater. His gaze didn't stay on the crater for too long, because he had more important issues to deal with, like getting an answer from Hua Shi. Hua Shi felt uncomfortable being stared at by Jingjiu, asking, "Do you want some tea?" "I don't have an iron kettle," said Jingjiu. Hua Shi curled her lips and said, "You have no idea how much they love you." It was interesting that Zhong Lizi and Ran Handong did put the iron kettle into their backpacks when they packed their luggage. It was why the little girl had such a hard time carrying it. The iron kettle was placed on the electromagnetic plate, and the clear water was poured into it, waiting to be boiled. A few green tea leaves were placed on the ceramic plate in silence. Jingjiu looked at her in silence. Hua Shi was a young mistress of an aristocratic family on the Stargate base and a distant relative of the Hua family on the main planet. She was a talented young woman, and her talent was quite good in the eyes of the human society. When she participated in the selection of the priest of the Stargate, she was liked by many people on TV, because she was naive and adorable with a kind of naive and clumsy attitude. If he were to take her to the amusement park to play or to make a bed with her, this little girl would be a good choice. However, Jingjiu was going to the Sea of Dark Matter this time, and the journey might be dangerous. Why would he bring her along? The sound of water in the iron kettle grew louder, and the room grew quieter. Hua Shi asked in a low voice, "How did you know someone was there?" Jingjiu said, "That person's cultivation state is very high. His killing intent was suddenly released, and I felt it." Hua Shi didn't understand and said, "I've only seen killing intent in novels. Is it real? Is that a kind of information wave or a particle current?" Jingjiu said, "I think it's the observer effect." Hua Shi curled her lips and said, "It's not fair to explain the story of the macroscopic world with quantum physics." Jingjiu said, "Then there is no explanation." Hua Shi raised her head, looked into his eyes and asked seriously, "Since you know he's there and he wants to kill you, why don't you kill him?" Regardless of whether it was the warship or the Reverend Qisong, or the building of the military department or Shinyunmai, all of them proved that Jingjiu was a man who appeared calm but was actually extremely crazy. In order to ensure his safety, when he felt danger, he would definitely counterattack immediately, no matter who the other party was, no matter what the situation was at that time. Jingjiu said, "You said that murder is against the law." The extremely cold and hard, killing intent clearly indicated the identity of the swordsman at the bottom of the circular mountain. It had been 9,000 years since the stone man on Mount Chenwu attained the Tao and ascended. That person had a very high cultivation state, and his killing intent was natural. The cultivation method he practiced was also very special, which made him more powerful in the extremely cold space. But that person's head was made of stone, and he was slow and clumsy, so he couldn't pose a threat to Jingjiu. Jingjiu sensed his killing intent, and warned him not to follow him. It was because he found it troublesome, and he didn't want the scorching sun battleship to meet with any mishap. Of course, if Hua Shi was willing to help him, he wouldn't mind killing this person. Hearing his answer, Hua Shi felt it was rather childish, pouting. It was then that the water in the iron kettle boiled. She picked up a few tea leaves and threw them into the kettle. The steam rose up. A few leaves were bobbing up and down on the surface of the water. The steam was occasionally dispersed by the wind, exposing the eaves, the stone statue, and a well-trimmed short plank. Kneeling on the futon opposite the hot spring, Ran Donglu said in a low voice, "General Li should be Jing Jiu's division commander. We shouldn't have high hopes for him." The cool breeze passing through the forest blew away more of the fog, gently ruffling the bathrobe with embroidered flowers and her neat black bangs. The young priest raised the porcelain cup with 2 fingers and brought it to her lip. She drank up the strong wine in the cup slowly and sighed delightfully, saying, "He is a cocoon breaker after all." Ran Donglu lowered his head and said, "The cocoon breakers are indeed powerful, but if you ignore the rules we can still try to kill them all." The young girl put down the porcelain cup in her hand and looked at the fog above the hot spring, her eyes somewhat vacant, saying, "I didn't set the rules, so how can I ignore them?" Ran Donglu lowered his head even more, and so did his voice, saying, "God has been dead for many years." The young girl's eyes gradually focused and became extremely cold, saying, "The rules weren't set by him, so what's the use of his death? You're dismissed." Ran Donglu didn't dare stay any longer. He got up from the futon and backed out of the courtyard slowly with his body hunched. The wind stopped blowing. The hot fog of the hot spring grew thicker, flowing everywhere like milk. Looking at the sky, the young girl pouted and remarked in a bored manner, "You've guessed it so quickly. It's really boring." In the days that followed, Jing Jiu lay in the chair and looked at the scenery of the universe outside the window, neither sleeping nor speaking. He didn't mention anything about killing people or cloning people to Hua Shi anymore. One day, the ring on his finger emitted a faint glow. His awareness entered the interplanetary network and arrived at the deep end of the hidden network, sitting in the room on the sky wheel. Sitting in the chair, Ran Handong sent a few pieces of data to Jing Jiu, saying, "Among the 37 targets under surveillance, nothing special has happened. The person in the space station of the Science Academy left last night. His destination might be the same as yours. The other person is in your fleet." Jing Jiu backed out of the interplanetary network after copying the data. The ascendant from the space station of the Science Academy should be the 7th House Master of Yamatsai, Jing Jiu. His line of sight fell on a distant corner of the universe outside the window. The battleship looked like a small wooden stick in the vast universe. It was unclear who the ascendant hiding on the battleship was, but he shouldn't be someone from Zhongzhou school. Based on the style of the Grandmaster and generally, the ascendants from Cloud Dream Mountain would have been killed by them a long time ago. The stone man from Chun Wu Mountain was intimidated by Jing Jiu and didn't follow him. By the time he arrived at the Sea of Dark Matter, he would have to deal with the ascendant, Jing Jiu, Shen Yunmai, and General Li at the same time. All of a sudden, the small wooden stick in the distance was ablaze. In the next moment, the stars in the dark universe grew dimmer. Tens of thousands of burning flying swords were traveling in the distant sky. They were tens of thousands of battleships. They were the largest and most powerful Starcore fleet. Jing Jiu had witnessed such a spectacular scene from a distance many years ago when he ascended for the first time. He had finally seen it again that day. Jing Jiu stood up and walked to the front of the window. He looked at those battleships in silence, his expression grave. It was not fear, but respect. After the fall of the distant ancient civilization, the human society had embarked on 2 different paths according to the arrangement of that god. If Jing Jiu represented the highest peak of the path in Chaotian, this magnificent fleet of battleships represented the highest peak of the interplanetary civilization. Tens of thousands of battleships combined could easily destroy the union of dozens of planetary systems and travel unhindered in this part of the universe. The foundation of the human civilization had moved from the surface of the planet to the space. With these battleships, there was no need to worry about what the important figures and officials of the Federation of the Milky Way were thinking. As such, the true leader of the Federation of the Milky Way was General Li. It was the ascendants who controlled this civilization. Do you think it's spectacular? Huashi asked Jingjiu as she walked to his side. Jingjiu uttered Huashi went on with a faint smile. You haven't seen it before, have you? Yes, I have, replied Jingjiu. Huashi felt surprised. Jingjiu said, You should have read that book, so you should understand what I mean. Huashi looked at him with wide eyes and asked confusedly, Sometimes I really don't understand what you are thinking about. Do you really come here just to enjoy the scenery? Back then, I thought I saw tens of thousands of burning flying swords, and those sword currents could wipe out a civilization easily. But now I know it's not real. After a moment of silence, Jingjiu continued, We have been cultivating for a great many years, and all we want is to ascend. But now we find that it's not real. Do you have a feeling of unreality? Asked Huashi. Jingjiu said, It's indeed unreality, but it's also interesting. Do you like this world? Asked Huashi. Jingjiu said, There is a large universe here, with countless real stars and seemingly endless fairy energy, but I still don't like it. Huashi asked after some thought, Is it because there is no one you like? Do you still miss that world? No, said Jingjiu. It's because this world has an end according to the current rules of physics. The universe would perish in the end. Everything had an end. It was the same for existence. A similar conversation had taken place by the hot spring. Shin Yunmai cried bitterly by the hot spring for the same reason when he was a child. A shrill alarm suddenly rang out on the scorching sun battleship. Huashi looked out of the window. Jingjiu turned around and went somewhere. It didn't take long for the alarm to die down, replaced by the sound of zither. In the human society of the interstellar era, it was rare to hear such ancient and flowing zither music. The officers and men on the battleship came to the window and looked out along the sound of the zither. An ancient zither was floating in the dark universe. Shin Yunmai sat cross-legged behind the zither, plucking the strings with his fingers. His white robe reflected the distant starlight, looking like a fairy man. There was no air in the universe, so how could the zither sound be heard? It was unclear why the starlight moved, but Jingjiu showed up in front of the zither. Wearing a blue hooded sweatshirt, he looked like an ordinary youth, but he immediately stole all the splendor from his opponent. Chapter 852. The zither music passed through the empty space and the alloy body of the battleship, reaching everybody's ears, including Jingjiu's. The zither music was very moving, but it was not a music of this world. The rhythm was comfortable and bright, revealing a joyous feeling of a rainy night in spring. It was as mild as water and as precious as oil. I don't know what the song leading the romantic night is like, so I wrote one myself. Do you think it's similar? Shin Yunmai lifted his head and asked Jingjiu. There was no air in the universe, but his voice was like the music of the zither. It could be heard by the listener or the other party's awareness, regardless of the medium. I'm not sure, replied Jingjiu. The young masterly had played Leading the Romantic Night many times at the 3000 Nunnery in Chaotian. Lien Sanhua listened to it attentively, but Jingjiu didn't pay much attention to it. Lien Sanhua's zither music at the plum meeting was probably like this. She's really unromantic. Shin Yunmai went on sentimentally. The young masterly is pitiful, and so is Lien Sanhua. Jingjiu retorted after a moment of silence, You know nothing. Shin Yunmai was neither angry nor mad. He said leisurely while stroking his temples, I've read The Path Toward Heaven a few times. The story is not new, but it's interesting. It's because your world is interesting to begin with. Many people in the upper echelons, including Ran Handong, were well aware that this young master of an honorable status liked the old-fashioned stuff the most. His way of doing things was also quite old-fashioned, except that he was more crazy, casual, messy, decisive, and shameless. It was natural for him to be interested in Chaotian. It's because of the geological structure, said Jingjiu. What he meant was that Chaotian and the Federation of the Milky Way were similar in nature, except for the difference in the scenery and the people. Shen Yunmai said with raised eyebrows, "Your primitive imagination and fear of the outside world are a bit stupid, but the sense of security brought by the self-enclosed world is something we don't have here." Jingju didn't like talking, save for a few people such as Zhao Lei. But he liked Shen Yunmai a lot, so he was willing to talk to him. "There's Aoyama over there, and there's also Aoyama over here. As long as we don't look beyond the boundary, it feels about the same." Upon hearing this, Shen Yunmai was intrigued. He asked with a gleam in his eyes, "The old guys said that there are at least 2 or 3 sects in Chaotian that are as powerful as Aoyama, like Cloud Dream Mountain and Guoqing Temple. But according to your book, have you dealt with all of them?" Jingju uttered Shen Yunmai sighed with emotion and said, "You have done what the old guys couldn't. You are indeed much stronger than them." Jingju said, "Yes, I am the strongest." Even the coldest universe could not be colder than this sentence. If it were someone else, he might have opened his mouth and did not know how to react. However, Shen Yunmai seemed to take it for granted. He was completely suppressed by Jingjiu during the battle in the building of the military headquarters, and he did not have any chance to take advantage of the situation. Of course, Jingjiu was the strongest in the universe. That's why the old guys decided to hand over this world to you. However, you should be aware that they gave you the right of authority because they hoped that you could do something for them. The future leader of the humans has to do something for the humans. It's no different from doing business. Shen Yunmai's hand left the zither, but the strings of the zither were still bouncing, giving off a pleasant sound. The dim light of the distant permanent star fell on the strings of the zither, turning into fainter broken glows. "I'm just going there to take a look," said Jingjiu. "The jelly star region is not the destination. The sea of dark matter is where you are needed. It's very dangerous there, and you might die there." Shen Yunmai laughed heartily. His smile was a bit strange, like that of a clown with lipstick. However, it was not a curse, but a joyful and expectant smile. Jingju knew that Shen Yunmai had heard the conversation between him and Hua Shi. Jingju recalled what the young priest had said by the hot spring a few days ago. Shen Yunmai had been thinking about life and death since he was 5 years old, but he hadn't found the solution. As a result, he had become like this. Jingju looked at Shen Yunmai and said earnestly, "I won't." Shen Yunmai said more earnestly, "Everybody will die." Jingju didn't want to repeat the meaningless discussion, so he asked, "What's the matter?" The remaining heavenly demons in the Jelly Star region had been wiped out, but why didn't the Central Star Fleet return to the main planet region but wait for Jingju here? "The fleet will take you to carry out a new mission. I have to give you some information about the Sea of Dark Matter in advance." Shen Yunmai took out an object and handed it to Jingjiu, saying, "Less than 5 people in the Federation of the Milky Way are qualified to read this information. You have to be careful." The Scorching Sun battleship sped up. It didn't take long before it joined the Central Star Fleet along with a few other battleships. It was impossible to see the landscape of the mountains in the mountains. As they came to the fleet, the tens of thousands of burning flying swords turned into tens of thousands of bright stars, and the universe became the moving background. The peaceful and stable sea of stars was boring. Jingju stopped looking at the scenery outside the window and started reading the object given to him by Shen Yunmai. A large amount of data poured down on the light screen like a waterfall. Innumerable complicated three-dimensional diagrams and microscopic images flashed incessantly, all of which were related to the Sea of Dark Matter. The Federation of the Milky Way kept the information about the Sea of Dark Matter strictly. Even the hidden network didn't have too much of it. This was the first time Jingjiu had seen it. The Sea of Dark Matter was the ocean of dark matter, which had existed in the universe for more than 100,000 years. The dark energy swallowed the galaxy slowly and turned all the life forms it encountered into monsters. The distant ancient civilization had been destroyed in this catastrophe. Now that the civilization had recovered, this was the most urgent problem to be solved. It was ridiculous and despairing that the humans knew very little about the dark matter, even though they had studied it for many years. There were two guesses about the dark matter. One of them was that the dark matter was a kind of weak force particle or a slow neutrino. The problem was that neither the distant ancient civilization nor the current Federation of the Milky Way had been able to capture or observe these tiny particles. The Federation of the Milky Way had spent a great deal of resources to build the strong magnetic binding accelerator around the nebula more than 10 years ago, but it hadn't discovered anything yet, much to the disappointment of the scientists and the populace. The other theory was that the dark matter or the dark energy was an existence that had nothing to do with the physical rules of the main universe. The human brain structure and logic were based on the physical rules of the main universe, so they had no way to understand the dark matter or the dark energy. However, this theory was like a theme that often appeared in the science fiction. It seemed sensible, but it was utterly meaningless. As such, the humans could only learn about the sea of dark matter indirectly through those living beings and monsters that had been infected by the dark matter. The materials given to him by Shin Yunmai included the history of the sea of dark matter and the relevant research results of the scientific circle, including those monsters. Those grotesque, dark and gloomy monsters had some interesting names, which seemed to be words taken from the classic. It didn't take long for Jingjiu to finish reading these materials. His line of sight fell on the encrypted file at the end of the materials, remaining silent. Only 5 people in the Federation of the Milky Way were qualified to know this secret. That secret was a city. Jingjiu walked to the window and looked at the stars in the sky. The Central Star Fleet had already arrived at the edge of the galaxy and was on its way to a farther place. There was no twisting passage here, so it would take 17 days to accelerate. The speed of the battleships grew faster and faster. The stars that could be seen clearly at the moment were the lights at the end of the battleships. The real stars had already disappeared behind them. The alarm suddenly rang out and then disappeared. The scene in front of the fleet and a few lines of words appeared on the light screen. 3 mining ships had appeared in front of the fleet. Hundreds of laser guns shot out at the same time, emitting a bright light beam. It was unclear which mining company the 3 mining ships belonged to, but they turned into green smoke and dissipated in the vast space. The people on the mining ships were all dead. The route of the fleet was broadcasted to the whole galaxy. For some reason, those mining ships didn't evade the fleet in advance. As such, they had no choice but to suffer such a fate. Tens of thousands of battleships were accelerating. It was impossible to change the course or decelerate. In other words, it would be a waste of a great deal of resources. Everything in front of the passage of the Central Star Fleet would be destroyed. The civilization as a whole was moving forward, and any individual blocking its way would be crushed. Faced with tens of thousands of battleships, even the swordsmen in the inherited night state and Jingjiu in the Federation of the Milky Way had no choice but to evade them, to say nothing of those few mining ships. Jingjiu was well aware of this, but he thought of Zhonglizi's father. The mining ships invested in by that professor had probably disappeared for the same reason. This was a trivial matter for the universe, but it was different for the girl with a terminal illness. 27 standard days later, the Central Star Fleet arrived at the edge of the galaxy. It was said that this place was the place where the distant ancient civilization had started. It was an empty graveyard at the moment, so dark that it made people feel depressed. Tens of thousands of battleships were waiting in the dark space. They were the Star Chain Fleet. The 2 fleets joined together and turned into countless stars, representing the human civilization glowing in the universe. The Federation of the Milky Way had no intention of fighting the Sea of Dark Matter. It was merely a rehearsal for the plan to seal off the Sea of Dark Matter. The Scorching Sun battleship slowed down along with the Star Fleet. It became stationary 4 hours and 37 minutes later. A dark permanent star hung in the distant space in silence, on which some flames could be vaguely seen. The surface of the star was covered with a layer of solidified ash, as if it would be extinguished at any moment. This place was the edge of the galaxy and the edge of the sea of dark matter. The permanent star was the evidence. There was a planet on the dark permanent star, on which was a city of the distant ancient civilization. It was the place Jing Jiu intended to go to. Chapter 853. The Star Chain Fleet and the Star Core Fleet kept on advancing toward the Sea of Dark Matter. The burning battleships didn't pay any attention to this black permanent star that seemed to be on the verge of dying. Like everything else in the universe, the permanent stars would experience the process of birth, growth, evolution, and death in the end. In comparison to the humans and other life forms, the permanent stars had many ways of dying. However, the way of death of this permanent star was evidently special and unnatural, as if it had been extinguished by an external force. It was because of the long distance that Jing Jiu couldn't see clearly what the solidified ash layer covering the surface of the permanent star was, but he guessed that it might have something to do with the dark matter. This was the edge of the sea of dark matter, where the dark and the light were engaged in the final battle. There seemed to be nothing in the vast and empty universe, but it was full of a suffocating smell. The suffocation was mostly due to the absence of anything, not because of the great pressure from the outside world. The scorching sun battleship halted in the outer space of the black galaxy, illuminating the universe a bit. Some cracks in the space and turbulence of particles could be observed. These were probably the remnants of the explosion of tens of millions of huge nuclear bombs. Judging from the intensity of the radiation background, the explosion should have occurred during the period of the distant ancient civilization more than 100,000 years ago. His ring emitted a faint glow as he kept in touch with the battleship and received all sorts of data. The light in the transport spacecraft was gentle and bright. Neither Hua Shi nor the biochemical officer noticed it. By now, Jing Jiu realized that the grave-like universe outside the window was the most important star region of the distant ancient civilization. It was interesting that Chaotian was on the other side of this graveyard. The black planet was getting closer and closer, and the atmosphere grew increasingly depressing. Gradually, they could see the scene of a civilization that looked like a withering flower outside the spacecraft. The transparent objects that looked like thin wings were dyed black, looking like moths flying in the sky. It was unclear what system they belonged to in the distant ancient civilization. Many other objects resembling the Stargate in the science fiction were floating outside the atmosphere of the black planet. The gray materials used to construct the space gates had countless black spots on their surfaces, looking like rotten mushrooms. There were many spores drifting in the atmosphere, looking like smoke. The regular humans couldn't see those tiny spores, but they couldn't evade the surveillance equipment on the spacecraft and Jing Jiu's eyes. The spacecraft made some cracking sounds as it withstood the impact of the smoke. The surface of the spacecraft didn't show any sign of being polluted. It seemed that the spores had lost their vitality. The whistling of the wind replaced the sound of the impact, indicating that the density of the atmosphere was getting higher and closer to the ground. The mountains, valleys, and plains had been infected by darkness for many years, and then eroded by wind and rain for more than 100,000 years, adding a sense of desolation. From afar, the forest and grassland were black under the dim light, like an ink painting. The spaceship cut open a passage in the atmosphere. The wind howled far away, and the black forest shook, throwing out countless black powder. There were no tall buildings on the surface of the planet, only thin ribbon-like pipes connecting countless buildings floating in the air, just like the relationship between blood vessels and muscles. Most of the pipes were broken or collapsed, and the buildings were in ruins. It was impossible to tell what they looked like in the past. Not long after, the spaceship arrived at the wasteland at the north pole of the planet. The ground here was covered with a gray substance, and a ring-shaped base was built there. The perimeter of this circular base was at least 400 kilometers. It was incomparably huge. Looking from the sky, it looked like a crater that had been bombarded by an asteroid. The ring-shaped base had a gravitational field of the highest energy level, which could be clearly felt even from far away. She glanced at Jingjiu, but she did not detect any change of emotion on his face. The spaceship landed in the ring-shaped base. It was as quiet as a speck of dust falling into a porcelain plate, and it did not attract any attention. 2 military officers walked out of the ring-shaped base to welcome Jingjiu and his companions. It was then that another spaceship broke through the atmosphere and flew over, followed by the sound of a zither. She could not help but frown. Shin Yunmai walked down from the spaceship, followed by 2 young men dressed like little Taoist children, who held a zither and a sword in their arms. It was absurd to see such a scene on the planet left behind by the distant ancient civilization, in the ring-shaped base, and under the protection of the gravitational field. "Nice to meet you, Advisor Shin." The 2 military officers stood at attention and saluted Shin Yunmai excitedly. Shin Yunmai said expressionlessly, "He is now the chief advisor of the military, and his rank is higher than mine." The 2 military officers came back to their senses and said to Jingjiu, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Advisor." Having said this, they turned to Shin Yunmai again and said in a louder voice, "Nice to meet you, Commander." Though Shin Yunmai was the commander of the Star Fleet, his authority was not as high as Jingjiu's. He waved his hand disinterestedly and led the 2 children toward the base, saying, "Let them show you around first." This galaxy was probably the birthplace of the distant ancient civilization, or at least it had been an important residence for the humans of the distant ancient civilization. The mortals in the Federation of the Milky Way had no idea about this planet and the ring-shaped base. There were only a few traces in the hidden network. The city recorded in the top-secret information was located outside the ring-shaped base. This planet was the place where the distant ancient civilization was first occupied by the Sea of Dark Matter, and the city was the place where the Dark Night first appeared. The life forms infected by the Dark Night turned into the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter, and they began to slaughter and swallow the living humans and other life forms. The whole city and even the whole planet had turned into a hell. It was unknown what method the ancient civilization had used to isolate the planet, sealing off the monsters and the humans who were still alive. More than 100,000 years later, the new humans found this planet according to the clues provided by the female priest. They landed in this city, and found to their surprise that it was still the same as it had been more than 100,000 years ago. It seemed that the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter, the process of the infection, and the horrible scenes were still taking place. As far as the humans were concerned, this was the most precious first-hand information. Through the observation and study of this planet, they had a deeper understanding of the Sea of Dark Matter and those monsters, and they had more methods to exterminate these monsters and prevent the contamination of the planet. To avoid causing a panic, the government of the Federation of the Milky Way guarded this planet closely. Only the soldiers who had passed the strict examination were allowed to enter the base. The research institute under the base was even more heavily guarded. Many researchers had never returned to their hometowns after coming here. The former director of the research institute was the current president of the Science Academy of the Federation. Shin Yunmai had worked here for half a year. Normally, this planet should be safe at the moment, but the military and the research institute were still observing and experimenting around the base cautiously, not daring to go too deep into the base. The monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter didn't need energy to survive. No matter how powerful the distant ancient civilization was, they couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't hide in the deep part of the ground, waiting to wake up one day. Jingjiu had read the information and didn't need the introduction from the officer, but he didn't stop the officer from talking. Otherwise, the footsteps in the passageway would be too monotonous. Hundreds of researchers were in the underground laboratory. The base was very spacious, and the footsteps and voices could be heard far away, echoing vaguely. Outside the French window were the black fields, streets, buildings, space gates, and corpses. The black dust was actually the dust or the powder, and some places were the black ointment, though it was unclear if they were the rotten leaves. Jingjiu halted his steps and looked at the window, recalling the art installation under the ice cap at the south pole of the main planet. A bird was struggling in vain on the surface of the ocean, full of black ointment. The officer thought Jingjiu was interested in the French window, saying, "The high composite material has a good resistance to impact, so it's safe." "Hua," she exclaimed with widened eyes, "now that all the monsters are dead, who will attack?" The officer was taken aback at first, and then explained to Jingjiu, "The smooth metal and glass can both prevent the contamination, but we have to consider the strength of the materials." Jingjiu didn't ponder the hidden meaning in what Hua Shi said, nor did he care about the officer's explanation. All he did was look at the window in silence. The city was right outside the window, soundless. The wind blew over the forest, and the fallen leaves were all black. It was deathly quiet. Chapter 854. Jingjiu understood why General Li asked him to come here. Seeing the scenes with his own eyes and seeing them in the materials were two entirely different feelings. The former was more vivid and more realistic. Jingjiu kept walking forward. The footsteps and the explanation broke out in the quiet and empty passageway again. One of the two military officers was familiar with the base and the environment of the outside world. The other was a researcher who knew more about the sea of dark matter. Up until now, the Research Institute has only been able to observe and calculate indirectly. The black dusts and powders are still the matter of our world, but they have been modified by a certain force on the level of the microscopic particles. The physical rules are chaotic in the superparticle state, so we can only conclude some rules. The existence of the dark matter is calculated based on mathematical tools, which can't be captured or collected. What we can ascertain is that it doesn't have a static mass. The infection is neither an invasion of the nervous system nor a modification. It's hard to understand. The distant ancient civilization has determined that the infection is irreversible, so they have no choice but to isolate it. To prevent the invasion of the sea of dark matter, the key is to cut off the source, that is, to wipe out those cracks in the secondary dimension. The supercomputer core of the Federation can monitor a part of the galaxy in real time. It's basically a race against time in these regions. Yet, those cracks in the space occur soundlessly, and they can sometimes infect some planet. The proportion of colonized planets and mineral stars in this galaxy is very low. According to the frequency of the infection, the sea of dark matter has a much larger area than we had imagined in the past, and it might even surround this galaxy. The two military officers stopped in front of a floor-to-ceiling window and said, "It's the center of the city outside." Jingjiu and Hua Shi looked out of the window, but they didn't see any high-rise buildings, save for the black woods and shrubs. Some streets could be vaguely seen on the other side of the black woods. There were many cracks on the streets, from which black smoke was vaguely coming up. A gust of wind blew over and dispersed the black smoke, but it didn't vanish into the air. Instead, it dispersed in all directions. Countless particles fell down from the black treetops, and the wild grasses on both sides of the streets were drifting slowly, as if they would come back to life, but they were still lifeless. The particles in the smoke were the spores they had seen after the spaceship entered the atmosphere. The professors of the Research Institute were certain that the black spores were the cells that had been infected by the dark matter. All the infected creatures on this planet were dead, at least on the surface. The spores had no vitality and could not continue to infect other things, but they still looked very scary. It was true that the sea of dark matter had infected the living beings, or more precisely, the organic beings. If there were no life forms on a planet, the sea of dark matter wouldn't bring about any change even if it swallowed the planet. Moreover, the expansion of the sea of dark matter would slow down when there were no living beings, and it was far slower than the speed at which the galaxies moved away from each other. In other words, the sea of dark matter could at most affect the space of the local galaxy, but it couldn't pose any threat to the vast universe. Just like how a nail could not destroy the empire on the other side of the plains. The problem was that humans were not the universe itself, but life itself. Wherever the sea of dark matter passed, the sea of stars would turn into an abyss, and the lives would come to an end, and the human world would become a hell. The number of the extraterrestrial demons that had invaded the Stargate base was not large, but they had caused such a great loss because of these reasons. The city outside the window was the first hell. On the other side of the black smoke, the city was isolated by an invisible barrier, maintaining the appearance of hundreds of thousands of years ago. The distant ancient civilization was much more developed than the current Federation of the Milky Way, but their ideas were similar. It was evident that the rulers at the time intended to keep this hell as a laboratory to study the countermeasures and find a way to destroy the sea of dark matter. There were many corpses on the streets, in the buildings, and in the passageways. The corpses were the locust trees, the roses, the cockroaches, the rats, the dogs, the cats, and the humans. It was hard to imagine that the distant ancient civilization was so advanced that they could preserve this ugly world so well. The energy of the protective barrier can last for tens of thousands of years. The Federation has improved many aspects through the study of this protective barrier. The protective barrier of the new battleships and many protective barriers on the planetary level are all derived from this barrier. Of course, we can't achieve such a level of protection yet. An officer brought up the light screen and said to Jingjiu while clicking on a tiny black speck on the screen, "The infected beings will lose all their senses, but they will retain their intelligence before death." According to the information we have collected about the distant ancient civilization and the suggestions of the scientists of the present age, we have classified these living beings into 5 categories. The tiny black speck enlarged rapidly on the light screen and turned into a small piece of grayish-black tree branch. It was unclear what kind of living being it was. This is an insect called the stickworm. After being infected, it will have an almost endless life, just like other living beings. However, it is not a threat to us. It's just that the spores emitted by it can continue to infect other living beings for half a minute after it is killed. The officer thought that Jingjiu didn't know about this, so he explained patiently and in detail, "We can kill these things by destroying their form completely, but we should try not to use this method on the battlefield." Jingjiu didn't give a response. The officer continued, "The infected insects are called the scale monster. The infected animals are called the half-tail, the plants are called the gray wood, and the microorganisms are more troublesome, they have a strange name called the bloody thumb. As for the infected humans, they are called the preface." The black specks on the light screen were enlarged one by one, revealing their shape. They were the rumored monsters of the sea of dark matter. Even though they were given some ancient names by the distant ancient civilization and the scientists, they were still monsters. Though they were the tall and straight trees in the snow, the flowers swaying in the wind, the insects singing in the summer night, the cats on people's laps, the dogs under their feet, and the humans before they were infected, they were still monsters. According to the various monsters that appeared one by one, the detailed three-dimensional anatomical diagrams and detailed written explanations appeared on the light screen. They were the research results accumulated by the two civilizations, and they were very detailed. The diagrams included the movement speed of the monsters, their attacking methods, their weaknesses, and the fastest, simplest, most effective, and most economical way to destroy them. Some of the monsters were like a speck of dust, some looked like wild animals, and some looked like the zombies in the movies and games. Jingjiu was somewhat familiar with the appearance of these monsters, which was similar to the heavenly demons he had encountered after his ascension. The demons in the snowland of Chaotian were obviously the replicas of these monsters, or in other words, replicas of them, but one of them was black and the other was white. Yet, that god was not omnipotent. The demons of the Snowy Kingdom were obviously not as formidable as these monsters, and most importantly, they didn't have the ability to infect other living beings. The low temperature and the absolute deathly stillness were nonetheless different. Looking at the city outside the window, Jingjiu's eyes grew brighter and sharper. Though he saw many corpses of the blood thumbs, he still couldn't see the sea of dark matter. It was then that he thought of the mosquitoes in the fiend prison and cold cicada, and the snow girl for the umpteenth time. The circular base occupied a large area, so large that there was a mountain in the middle. In comparison to the peculiar high mountains on the equator of this planet, this mountain was not so high, but it was the highest mountain near the North Pole, so high that the city could be seen in its entirety. Standing by the cliff's edge, Jingjiu looked at the city in the distance, remaining silent. The sunlight shone on his face, which was not as attractive as usual. It was probably because the emotion in his eyes and brows was a bit faint. As the zither music rang out, Shen Yunmai arrived by stepping on the air and landed by Jingjiu's side. "What kind of weapons did the distant ancient civilization use at the time?" asked Jingjiu. "That kind of weapon could kill all the monsters and life forms on the surface of the planet in a short time, and it could also seal the cracks in the space of 2 dimensions. It was of course remarkable. The current Federation of the Milky Way couldn't achieve such a feat, be it the neutron bomb or the super-concentrated electromagnetic bomb. It's said that it was a weapon of the permanent star state, but the materials found by the Science Academy have no clue about it." Looking at the city in the dim light, Shen Yunmai continued, "Unfortunately, no matter how advanced a civilization is, it will enter the grave sooner or later." "Let's go and have a look," said Jingjiu. Jingjiu flew up from the cliff's edge and turned into a sword light, passing through the protective shield of the circular base and heading toward the distant city. The alarm rang out in the circular base, followed by countless surprised screams. Nobody could ensure his safety. What if he was infected by the dark energy? Chapter 855. Thanks to the unimaginable technology of the distant ancient civilization, this planet had no dark matter left, and it was impossible for those spores to remain active after so many years. The problem was that there might be some sleeping monsters in some extreme environments deep under the planet, and the most troublesome ones were the dark bacteria and viruses called blood thumbs, which might still exist in some places. Those blood thumbs were so tiny that they could hardly be seen by naked eyes. Even the swordsmen in the star state of the Federation of the Milky Way could not resist their infection without advanced protective equipment. After the incident in the building of the military headquarters, everybody knew that Jingjiu was a formidable swordsman. However, he was the chief advisor of the military and had the highest authority, so he had to receive the strictest protection. Jingjiu flew toward the nearby city without wearing any protective equipment, startling the military officers in the circular base. It didn't take long for the alarm to ring. A few armed mechas equipped with special suits rose into the sky, ready to chase after him along with the airwaves and flying dust. Seeing this, Shen Yunmai raised his eyebrows slightly, indicating that they should not worry. As the zither music started again, Jingjiu leaped into the sky and turned into a gust of wind, passing through the protective cover and disappearing into the distant city. There were neither tall buildings nor neon lights in the city. There were only dim streets and black corpses everywhere in the buildings that looked like floating islands. Those black corpses still had the same shape as they had many years ago, looking a bit soul-stirring. Reflecting the dim light of the distant stars, they looked like the real scenes in hell. Jingjiu didn't pay attention to these corpses or the remains of the distant ancient civilization in the buildings. He raised his head and looked at the sky. A dozen sword lights passed through the dim streets and came to his side. The lights condensed into a figure. Shen Yunmai said, The people in the research institute don't know that there are many blood thumbs on this planet, but the military officers in the base do. Jingju uttered After he arrived in the city, he had sensed the existence of those tiny, dark, and cold creatures, knowing that they should be the so-called blood thumbs. Those creatures were indeed too small to be seen or discovered, but they couldn't escape the perception of his sword awareness. The first time I came to 857, I was as confident as you are now, but I was infected. My right hand started to turn black, so I had to cut it off with a sword and get a mechanical arm. After that, I had to deal with these things more and more, and I felt that it was a little troublesome, so I changed my entire body. That's why I don't have to worry about these things now. Shin Yunmai raised her beautiful hands and admired them for a moment in the dim light of the star. What about you? She asked. Why aren't you worried? Jingju recalled the battle in the military building and thought, so that's how it is. Shin Yun looked at Jingju's face. After looking at it for a while, he sighed and said, That's right, your body must also be special. There was no dark matter on this planet, and the spores were not active. Even if there were, Jingju was not worried about being infected by the darkness. Earlier, a blood thumb had drifted over in the dust. He deliberately let it fall on his hand and felt it for a while before he shattered it with his sword will. With the blood thumb's piercing and soaking abilities, it could not break through his skin at all. The ascendants from Chao Tian like the immortal Tan and Chao Yuan had no need to worry about these problems after their bodies were modified by the fairy energy. If that god intended to turn Chao Tian into a laboratory, he had at least succeeded in this aspect. What was hard to understand was that Shin Yunmai was the son of the Grand Master of Aoyama, and his status in the Federation of the Milky Way was similar to that of the Crown Prince. As such, he knew many things. For instance, the immortal Qi Song brought the battleship to pick Jingju up, but he didn't know that the laboratory on the Stargate base had observed and studied his body. Shin Yunmai followed Jingju's line of sight and asked, What are you looking at? Thinking of what Lien Sandhua said, Jingju replied, I'm looking at the sun. Looking at the permanent star from the battleship, the color of the permanent star was almost black. Looking at it from the surface of the planet, the permanent star looked a bit brighter, looking more like a gray color. The gray color was the combination of the light and the darkness. The light was the permanent star itself, and the darkness was the spores covering the surface of the permanent star. As the temperature on the surface of the permanent star was not high enough, those dark spores were not burned away. They had stayed on the surface for more than 100,000 years after losing their vitality. Those dark spores drifted away from the planet and the battleship after losing their vitality, and were brought to the surface of the permanent star by the gravitational force. How many people had died in this galaxy more than 100,000 years ago? Hundreds of millions or billions. Most of the light and heat radiation of the permanent star had been blocked. But why could this planet survive until now? The temperature on the surface of the planet was still suitable, and the ruins were still intact. To say nothing of the fact that it hadn't become a world of ice and snow, and the lake water that was devoid of life energy hadn't frozen over. The utilization of the geothermal energy was only one aspect. The large energy furnace left by the distant ancient civilization was the most important reason. The Research Institute of the Science Academy of the Federation on this planet was far superior to the laboratories on the Stargate base in terms of level and scale. What the scientists and engineers needed to do was to understand, analyze, learn and imitate the achievements left by the distant ancient civilization, and then transform them into the technological achievements of the new humans, such as the protective shield of the battleship and the mysterious weapons of the military. The technological prowess of the Federation of the Milky Way had advanced by leaps and bounds. It took them only a few thousand years to develop to such a level. It was because they had discovered this planet. The number of this planet was 857. It was the 857th planet with the remains of the distant ancient civilization that the new humans had discovered. Planet number 857 was the first planet to be swallowed by the sea of dark matter more than 100,000 years ago. A great many spatial cracks appeared in the city and the underground, and the dark matter gushed out noiselessly, changing the whole world. The flowers, trees, birds, animals and humans had all turned into dreadful monsters. The humans suffered a great deal of casualties, and the reinforcement fleet was also infected. The whole planet and even the nearby space had become a dreadful hell. In the end, the distant ancient civilization had no choice but to make a difficult decision. They employed a certain weapon to wipe out all the lives on the planet number 857. When the distant ancient civilization sealed off this planet and employed the secret weapon, many humans should still be alive on the surface and underground of the planet. Those humans had all died like the insect. In the next moment, this planet was completely sealed off. The Federation of the Milky Way had discovered many planets inhabited by the distant ancient civilization over the years, but the planet number 857 was the only one that was preserved so well, especially in the central area of this city. The humans still had some hope at the time. They wanted to find a way to defeat the sea of dark matter through research. Later, the humans didn't have any more hope. They abandoned all the planets swallowed by the sea of dark matter, and they didn't use so many resources to save them. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and looked at the city. The whole city was enshrouded by a protective shield, and the air was absolutely still. There wouldn't be any wind for many years. However, a gust of breeze arose today as Jingjiu and Shin Yunmai arrived. The breeze blew up the black spores in the streets and buildings, making them flutter in the air. It was hard to describe the architectural style of the city with words. It was unclear whether it was the ancient style or the interplanetary style. It looked more like the exhibits in the modern art museums. In fact, this planet and this city were the exhibits left by the distant ancient civilization to the later generations, including those black corpses. As the breeze blew over, a tree toppled to the ground and turned into a puff of black smoke, turning into countless dead spores drifting in all directions. Jingjiu suddenly remarked as he followed the spores in the distance, "Some species are missing." The monsters transformed from the insects were the scales, the infected animals were the half-tails, the plants were the gray wood, the microorganisms were the bloody thumbs, and the humans were the precursors. Similar things could be seen in the snowland of Chaotian, like the snow beetles, the snow worms, and the personal guards of the snow girl. What was the snow girl then? He had encountered many heavenly demons of the outside world after his ascension, and what were those monsters waving the black tentacles? More importantly, what were the formidable and dreadful monsters called the Mother Nest by the Federation of the Milky Way? Were there other life forms in the universe? Those life forms were very powerful and would turn into the Mother Nest after being infected by the sea of dark matter? Jingjiu was quite interested in this matter, which was a rare occurrence for him. Shin Yunmai knew what was on Jingjiu's mind. It was because he had the same thought when he had just learned about this knowledge. It's a pity that the humans are still alone. It's certain that there are no intelligent life forms like us in the local galaxy. As for whether there are intelligent life forms in the alien galaxy, Shin Yunmai looked at the night sky and said, "That's the destination chosen by those escapees more than 100,000 years ago, but those guys must have died in the hopeless and long journey." This place was the edge of the local galaxy. The stars in the night sky visible from the number 857 planet were not so dense that it couldn't be called a sea of stars. It was pitch black when the planet's back was facing the local galaxy. After a moment of silence, Jingjiu said, "We should go there and have a look." Chapter 856. More than 100,000 years ago, when the distant ancient civilization was facing a catastrophe, they divided into a few groups, as described in many novels. The two most mainstream factions were naturally the defense faction and the escape faction. The history proved that the defense group had been completely annihilated in the end. Yet, they had succeeded in stopping the expansion of the sea of dark matter and keeping it dormant. This patch of the universe had welcomed a new human civilization more than 100,000 years later, so it couldn't be said that they were failures. There were many conjectures as to what would happen to the escape group. Most of the conjectures were that they would end up in a hopeless or even miserable state. This was not a curse with hatred, but the result of many calculations based on many mathematical models. Jingzhou had made a few simple calculations and found that the escape group would end up in a bad situation. It was hard to reach the edge of the universe, and it was also hard to reach other galaxy groups like the opposite shore in the legends. Even if they left the edge of this galaxy group and went to the nearest galaxy group, it would be a long journey that would lead to the extinction of the civilization. There were trillions of permanent stars in this galaxy group, spanning a distance of 10 million light-years. But why could the distant ancient civilization and the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way reach most of the places in this galaxy group? The reason was simple. It was because the distant ancient civilization and the humans had the star map of this galaxy group. The star map referred to was not the information about the distribution of the star areas or the relative positions, but the invisible warped holes among the stars. The warped holes were like the wormholes in the mud. The entrances and exits were all in the field, and it was impossible to observe the inside of the holes. As long as they could figure out the information, they would be able to travel freely. All the warped holes discovered by the humans were in this galaxy group for some unknown reason or because of the evil intention of the Creator. Even the brave warriors who were brave enough to face the unknown dangers couldn't leave through the warped holes. The flying devices of the humans had to rely on the conventional propulsion to travel to the farther universe. Even though the devices of the gravitational field were more developed and the curvature flight had become a reality, the flying devices of the humans still couldn't surpass the speed of light. Since they couldn't surpass the speed of light, the distance between the galaxies became an unimaginable concept of time. No matter how many crystals and energy supplies those flying devices carried, they were far from enough compared to the vastness of the universe. In the end, they would die because they ran out of energy, just like the fate of this universe. The mountains could be opened, the seas could be leveled, and the lovers could meet, but it was impossible. Nirvana was only related to entropy and had nothing to do with hard work. Some people also proposed a common hypothesis in science fiction. The fugitive humans who took the giant spaceship to leave might establish a completely different social model in the long space voyage, creating different morals and laws, stimulating more life potential, evolving into a more powerful new human being, and there was hope that they could reach the other side. This kind of hypothesis once prevailed for decades, until the Hua family published an extremely short article according to that female priest's intention. The last paragraph of the article read as follows: Even after hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, from the grassland to the starry sky, humans have not undergone any fundamental changes. Even if they have changed, so what? The Protoss cannot transcend the laws of physics of this universe. The evolution of all life itself occurs under the existing laws of physics. Those who left back then are already dead, and any expectations for them are a humiliation to the dead and irresponsible to themselves. Jingzhou had learned a lot about the fugitives of the ancient civilization from the top-secret documents, and he had also read the article written by the girl in the bathrobe. However, he still believed that humans should go to more distant places. His expression was calm and his tone was nonchalant when he made the statement, as if he were saying that it was time to get up in the morning. Looking at him, Shun Yunmai furrowed his eyebrows slightly, as if he couldn't understand why someone like Jingzhou would say such meaningless words like those excellent miners. Jingzhou didn't have a way to travel through the galaxy, so he dropped the topic. There is no other intelligent life in this galaxy, What are the heavenly demons of the outside world? He asked. Shin Yunmai had heard the cocoon breakers talking about Chaotian, and he had read Jingjiu's article carefully, so he knew what the heavenly demons of the outside world meant. The monsters created by the dark matter and the second infection of the spores. You can consider them as new monsters created by swallowing and merging with each other. According to the current analysis, the blood thumb played an important role in this process, and some rare monsters might have something to do with the spiritual wills of the cultivation practitioners. You have to be careful if you encounter them. Thinking of the heavenly demons of the outside world he had encountered after leaving Chaotian, Jingjiu thought that the ones killed by the snow girl were not so powerful, but the one he encountered in the end was indeed troublesome. He had used up all of his fairy energy to kill the mother nest. If the frequency of the mother nest was too high, Jingjiu would have no choice but to find a way to build a spaceship with a superluminal speed. Shin Yunmai continued, "We call the monster of the highest state merged with the mother nest. It can release many spore generators, and its body is extremely powerful. Even the swordsman in the inherited night state, or the figures in the heavenly arrival state as you call them, are not a match for it. Though you're very powerful, you shouldn't fight it alone. Let the fleet do it." How could he not know that Jingjiu had killed a mother nest? Thinking that Jingjiu didn't know what he had experienced in the lab of the Stargate, Jingjiu felt it odd. He thought that those old guys took care of this child, as if he were a baby, and only told him what he needed to know. They didn't tell him anything about the secrets that could bring him danger. Thinking of all this, Jingjiu fixed his gaze on a pile of black fallen leaves by the street. The gust of wind brought by Jingjiu and Shen Yunmai had stirred up many dead spores and turned many fallen leaves into powder. The pile of black fallen leaves became sparser, exposing the thing underneath. It was hard to tell if the human corpse was a man or a woman. The thing in his arms was not a baby, but a cat. Both the human and the cat retained their original shapes, covered with a thin layer of black. If one looked closely, they would find that the black layer was made up of countless tiny black crystals. What kind of weapons were used by the distant ancient civilization more than 100,000 years ago? Jingjiu walked over, squatted down, and stroked the dead cat gently. He didn't sense any remaining energy, but somehow, he felt a familiar and intimate feeling coming from his fingertip. Jingjiu had an unimaginably strong control over his body. This should be the most tender touch in the universe, but the cat and the human holding it collapsed instantly, falling down and turning into ashes. This scene reminded Jingjiu of the ancient battleground at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley, where the skeletons of the huge animals were blown into ashes by the wind. The code of the circular base was the same as that of this planet, 857. The living facilities in the base were quite complete, even a bit luxurious. The suite provided for him, the chief consultant of the military, could be compared with the luxurious villas on the vacation planets. Sitting by the window, Hua Shi looked at the vast sandy land on the other side of the base, lost in thought. The young military officer stood in a corner in silence, the corners of his mouth curling up slowly, as if he had just said something. According to the law of the Federation of the Milky Way, a cyborg like him had no basic human rights because he didn't have artificial intelligence. According to the law of the Federation of the Milky Way, any development in the field of artificial intelligence was forbidden. As such, the former law was basically a few paragraphs of nonsense. This young military officer had no sense of existence, be it on the Scorching Sun battleship or here. It was probably for this reason that Jingjiu and Hua Shi didn't hide anything from him. Hearing the footsteps, Hua Shi turned around and asked Jingjiu, "What did you see?" Jingjiu countered, "Why do you think General Li asked me to see all this?" After some thought, Hua Shi replied, "I think he hoped that you could see the problem and then help solve it." "What do you think then?" asked Jingjiu while staring into her eyes. The information and this planet had told him many things, and the conversation with Shun Yunmai had helped him ascertain some facts. The ascendants in Chaotian included the human cultivation practitioners, the divine animals of ancient times, the giants in the ocean, and the snow girl. Where were these powerful beings? Shin Yunmai knew very little. The grandmasters of Oyama and generally had indeed placed the hope of solving the problem of the sea of dark matter on Jingjiu. Jingjiu didn't know if this was a good thing or not. In other words, there was nothing good or bad about this matter. Hearing Jingjiu's question, Hua Shi looked at the barren plain outside the window again. There was no smile on her small face, and the expression in her eyes was no longer naive. It was so peaceful that it was frightening. If you were the leader of the humans, what would you choose when you encountered the sea of dark matter more than 100,000 years ago? The introduction on the cover has been changed a few days ago. Maybe many of you don't know it. You can check it out. The introduction is a statement by Mr. Lu Sun. If a human wants to become a ferryman, he should ascend to heaven even though he was born on the ground. It is like the title of this chapter. Chapter 857. It was the happiest period of the human race since the birth of the ancestral planet. Their lifespan, health, cultivation in martial arts, gene modification, technological level, social structure, governance, energy sources, and even entertainment were almost perfect. However, it was then that they encountered the sea of dark matter. Standing by the window, Hua Shi said softly, "If it were the tragic period of war and chaos, or the period when the civilization suffered the first catastrophe and left the ancestral planet, we wouldn't feel sad if we encountered the sea of dark matter or the hell was destroyed. But why did we encounter the greatest catastrophe during the best period? If there is no reason in the universe, is this our fate? Why are we so unlucky then?" Jingjiu said, "Zhao Lei once said that there are many pleasant sounds in the world. The stream water is pleasant to the ears, so we should listen to it. Why should we applaud?" Hua Shi turned around and looked at him expressionlessly, as if she didn't understand why he made such an irrelevant remark. The stream water flows by itself and makes a sound when it meets the rock. Whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, it has nothing to do with us. Neither the stream water nor the rocks intend to let you hear it. Jingjiu continued, "By the same logic, the appearance of the sea of dark matter has nothing to do with us when it meets the life forms and causes death. The dark forces and the life forms affected by it have no emotions, love or hatred, and they don't even have a subjective purpose. They happen to appear in this galaxy." "This is still fate," said Hua Shi. Jingjiu said, "You can say that this is fate, but it's actually a matter of probability. And I've always thought that the humans or the life forms are fortunate to have appeared. It's because death and non-existence are the norm. As such, it's not that the humans are ill-fated even if they are extinct. It's just that they have returned to their normal state." After a moment of silence, Hua Shi said, "It's said in a book that there is no such thing as fate but choice. What is your choice then?" If it were someone else, their first reaction would be, "I'm not the leader of the humans, why should I shoulder such a heavy responsibility? It would drive me crazy to decide the fate of the humans by my own choice," but Jingjiu didn't think so. He was fully aware that he was qualified and capable of shouldering this responsibility. The only issue was whether he was willing to do so. General Li had asked him to come to this planet and see this city. Hua Shi's question was, in fact, a form of expectation or observation. Inspecting people was something he disliked the most. However, he still decided to answer this question because Hua Shi's attitude was very important to his plan. Jingjiu said, "Like that god, I'll try to solve the problem of the sea of dark matter first." This meant that they were going to fight. Hua Shi looked into his eyes for a long time and suddenly asked, "After you stay, what will you do with this planet?" Of course, he was asking about something that happened more than 100,000 years ago. Jingjiu had already gotten the answer in that city. he said. If the final result of the mathematical model is like this, I will do the same thing. Hua Shi turned and looked out of the window. The wasteland outside the window was still so desolate. Her figure seemed a little lonely, but for some reason, he could feel that her aura had softened. Aren't you afraid of death the most? She continued to ask. Jingjiu said, so we have to solve the problem. Didn't you say that silence and non-existence are the norm? The goal of cultivation is to get out of the norm. If the problem of the sea of dark matter can't be solved, will you try to leave? Of course. One last question. If you have to sacrifice yourself in exchange for the survival of more people, will you be willing to do it? I won't. Why? As long as I'm alive, the humans will be alive. Hearing Jingjiu's answer, Hua Shi fell silent for a long time. The black permanent star had no light, and the sunlight on the circular base was artificial. As a result, the wasteland outside the window looked like the scenery in an oil painting, unreal. She said in a nostalgic and regretful tone, if only he had been as bad as you are back then. Jingjiu knew whom she referred to. He said sentimentally, the paths are different, but they are all the same. Speaking of the paths, I think of you. Is the life of the cultivation practitioners really so boring? Don't you listen to music or dance? Hua Shi resumed the appearance of an innocent and adorable little girl, as if an aged soul had left her body in an instant. The scene was truly eerie. Yet, Jingjiu didn't show any reaction, saying, yes, but I don't like it. Hua Shi widened her eyes and asked while looking at him curiously, what do you like then? I've just asked them. They have everything here. The 857 circular base was the most important secret base in the Federation of the Milky Way. It was heavily guarded and kept a secret. It was hard for the military officers and the researchers to leave this place after they came here. As such, the living facilities here were quite complete. As she said, this place had everything. Here, one could watch the latest movies, listen to the latest music, and play the latest games from the 3 gaming companies. Of course, the gaming cabins were of the best quality, and there were all kinds of cultivation equipment. If one had enough privileges, he or she could even enjoy some special things. I don't like anything, said Jingjiu. Hua Shi looked at him sympathetically, as if she were looking at a good student who was forced by his parents to study every day and didn't have time for entertainment. When Jingjiu was still the immortal Jingyang, he lived a simple life, and he didn't like dealing with others. In addition, Nan Wang liked drinking alcohol and singing songs after drinking alcohol. As such, Jingjiu was used to staying behind closed doors in the manor cave. Yet, he still had some things he liked to do at that time, such as hot pot and mahjong. After he became Jingjiu, he lost all his 5 senses. He could only collect information and simulate it by calculating. He had no interest in such things as eating, drinking, and having fun. He didn't even like playing mahjong because he couldn't feel it. It was like the difference between playing mahjong in reality and playing mahjong in games. From a certain perspective, he was indeed worthy of sympathy. When Zhao Liu, Lu Shisui, and Gu Qing discovered this, they all wanted to hug him and lift him up because they felt sorry for him. Jingjiu didn't think it was something worth feeling sorry for. He didn't mind paying such a small price for his survival, and he didn't like the feeling of being pitied. He didn't pay any more attention to Hua Shi. He connected to the special network of the circular base and continued reading the materials related to the sea of dark matter. Hua Shi didn't want to pay any more attention to him. She turned around and led the young officer to the outside of the room, asking, "Is the wine party fun tonight? How about the alcohol? I like the strong alcohol." The young officer said, "According to the laws of the Federation, you are not old enough to drink alcohol." Hua Shi pouted and said, "I'll go dance then." The young officer said, "According to the analysis of the data, the favorite music of the host of the base is psychedelic rock, which is not suitable for your favorite dance." Hua Shi halted her steps and said, Let's find a host who likes the swing dance. Jingjiu lifted his head and shot her a glance. As the data flowed like a waterfall, it was already late at night. The wine party on the 857 base had reached its climax. Even though he was a long distance away from the heavy alloy door, Jingjiu could hear the increasingly louder cheers. It seemed that Hua Xi's wish had been fulfilled. The songs at the wine party were indeed swaying. As Jingjiu was about to shut off his six senses and shield himself from the sounds of the outside world, he suddenly heard a faint sound of something breaking through the air in the night sky. The alarm on the base didn't sound. The sound of something breaking through the air was quite sharp at first and then abruptly disappeared. It meant that the other party moved at a very high speed, even faster than the combat armors. Jingjiu figured out that the person was Shen Yunmai. After some thought, he pushed open the window and flew out. The sun in this galaxy was very dim. It was nighttime, so the environment was even darker. It was quite conspicuous in this galaxy and other galaxies. Under the starry sky, the two sword lights left the circular base. It didn't take long for them to arrive in the barren land in the south. There was no barrier to isolate the cities here. The barren land was truly desolate, devoid of life energy, and covered with black dusts everywhere. Jingjiu landed on a high peak, looking at the black field. The dusts were rolling in the field like a huge dragon. Shen Yunmai was running. He didn't fly. Instead, he kept running on the ground of the field, occasionally letting out a few shouts. There was no purpose or reason for him to run at night. This black field was the hell of death. Running in the hell and smelling the smell of death was what he wanted to do. However, it was something that others didn't dare to do. As such, his action seemed crazy and incomprehensible to others. Nobody knew how many dangers were hidden in the black field without a protective shield. They didn't know whether there were blood thumbs or spores with residual vitality, or even some monsters. Standing by the cliff's edge, Jingjiu watched the scene with appreciation. It didn't take long before Shen Yunmai ran back from the black field. The few battleships outside the atmosphere all noticed a straight line on the surface of the Earth, which was about 700 miles long. Along with the sound of rolling crushed stones, Shen Yunmai climbed to the peak top. Looking at the starry sky, he took a deep breath of the thin air that smelled of the spores of death and asked, "What are you doing here?" He combed his hair into a simple Taoist bun and wore a white robe as usual. After running at night, his hair was scattered on his shoulders, and his white robe was full of holes, some of which were even a bit scorched. It could be said that he was in rags. Jingjiu glanced at him and remarked, "Your robe is not good enough." Chapter 858. There was indeed something wrong with Shen Yunmai's mind. His intelligence was too high. He had been far away from ordinary people's emotions since he was a child. The world thought he was ruthless, cruel, and unreasonable, but it was because he had seen through the emotions and principles. His emotions were not similar to those of ordinary people, but he was also competitive. He sneered and said, "What do you know? When I was 14 years old, I made myself a set of white clothes out of ultrafine particles. Not to mention the wind and dust like tonight, even cosmic rays and ordinary flames wouldn't leave a single mark on it. The problem was, what was the point of that? It's not natural at all, and it's boring." "Cotton and linen?" asked Jingjiu. Shen Yunmai said, "I'm more interested in the natural silk you mentioned." Jingjiu thought Bai Zhao would not ascend, so he could not find the natural silk even if he wanted it. So he suggested, "It's the most comfortable to wear no clothes." There was no material that was softer than the wind, and no clothes that were more comfortable than a vacuum. Shen Yunmai understood this, so he explained, "I haven't decided what sex characteristics to choose. It's a bit weird to wear no clothes." His body had been modified. Everything from his muscles, bones, internal organs, hair, and teeth was the product of the combination of the latest materials, the most advanced technology, and the most brilliant Taoist magic. His genitals were also modified, but he had been hesitating whether he should continue to be a man or a woman. It was a shocking thing, both in terms of his idea and the actual operation. If it were someone else, they would not know how to respond. However, Jingjiu was quite calm, as if he was talking about what they should eat for dinner. He continued to suggest, "Do it in a way that's convenient for you." Shin Yunmai said seriously, "Everyone has their own inconvenience. Regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, they all had their own advantages, inconveniences, and burdens." Jingjiu thought it was reasonable, so he said, "The angels in the ancient religions don't have gender, so they are not ugly." Shin Yunmai shook his head and said, "They look too abnormal and inhuman." "You are a freak to begin with," said Jingjiu. Upon hearing this, Shin Yunmai did not get angry. Instead, he felt quite comfortable, even more comfortable than running naked in the spring breeze. It was not because he was a masochist, nor was it because he had never heard others call him a pervert in his life. It was because when Jingjiu said that he was a pervert, his tone was very calm and his expression was very natural. It was obviously a statement without any emotion. Who could discuss that shocking question with him in such a calm manner? Which pervert could talk about perverted things with him? He looked at Jingjiu and seriously said, "You'll be the first to inform me when I decide. By the way, do you want to keep the fur?" Jingjiu said, "What's the point of keeping useless things?" Shin Yunmai glanced at his black hair. "Beautiful," said Jingjiu. By the time Jingjiu returned to the ring base, the banquet had also ended. Hua Xi's small face was a bit red, but she didn't sweat. She looked as refreshing as before, but she had a faint smell of alcohol on her body. Seeing the expressionless Jingjiu, she remembered that she had a job to do. She stuck out her tongue and took out the iron kettle, starting to boil tea. The night passed uneventfully. In the early morning the next day, Jingjiu picked up the teacup and took a sip of the cold tea, heading toward the outside of the room. He had only taken a few steps when he thought of Jing Li's wife, and realized that he might be getting old. The two military officers from the day before had been waiting for him outside the door. They led him to the underground by the elevator. It took the elevator a while to arrive at the research institute, which should be 7 kilometers underground. The distant ancient civilization had also modified this planet, but it was not as thorough as the Stargate base. It should not have been completely emptied. The style of the research institutes was similar. The smooth and cold alloy walls ensured the strength and cleanliness of the buildings, and the ventilation system and access control system ensured the security of the research institute. However, the energy supply system here was different from that in other places in the Federation of the Milky Way. It was wireless transmission, which should be the standard of the energy transmission technology of the distant ancient civilization. The arrival of Jingjiu drew the attention of many staff members in the research institute. They all stood up and saluted him in the military or gazed at him, no matter whether they were the technical officials wearing the general stars or the eccentric professors. These technical officials and professors were all a bit old. Jingjiu recalled the introduction he had heard the day before. The Research Institute of the 857 planet base was designed to minimize the number of personnel changes as much as possible due to the need for absolute secrecy. Most of the participants had signed the lifelong service agreement in advance and had never gone out since they arrived on the planet. The occasional vacations on other planets were under the close supervision of the military. The genetically modified humans could live to more than 200 years old. A few old professors in the Research Institute had even lived on this planet for more than 100 years. The precious relics of the ancient civilization had a great attraction for these professors and scholars. Their long years of research life were not boring, but it was inevitable that there would be some side effects, especially when most of the male researchers were mentally ill. They had severe hair loss, and their aesthetic and living abilities had declined. There were only 30 checkered shirts in their wardrobes. Jingjiu had no objection to the last point. Dozens of identical white shirts were placed in the manor cave on the Shenma Peak. What he thought was that these researchers had a high proportion of bald heads, and they couldn't save much light, so it was unnecessary to do so. No matter how busy the researchers were, they all stood up and greeted the new chief advisor of the military, no matter how busy they were. Those scholars who were obsessed with research and had their minds wandering around were a bit conspicuous. Jingjiu noticed a professor. The professor wore a checkered shirt that had been washed so many times that the color had faded. His hair was as sparse as the willow trees by the lake of the 1,000-mile windy corridor, which was quite inconspicuous. He didn't drool while looking at the electronic image of the gravitational lens, nor did he applaud the latest achievement of the neutrino collector. Like most of the researchers, he nodded to him with a polite but boring smile, and then sat back in his chair, as if he were reading a document. Nobody noticed the unusual behavior of this professor. Even Ran Handong couldn't discover it by using the big data collection method. It was because he didn't show any unusual behavior. Yet, Jingjiu found the problem with this professor. It was because of his intuition as a cultivation practitioner, and because his checkered shirt, sparse hair, and alienated eyes were too common. He was like a drop of water in the ocean among the people of the research institute. It was hard to tell him apart. Of course, the crux of the matter was that Jingjiu knew this person. The 857 Research Institute had recently signed a contract with a professor from the Institute of High Energy Physics, whose family name was Long. Even the most rigorous military investigation didn't find out that this Professor Long had taught at the Northwest University of China, and his family name was Go. According to the standard time in this world, he was still in Chaotian last year, and he was the sect master of the Zhongzhou school at the time, the Immortal Tan. Jingjiu didn't talk to the Immortal Tan, nor did he ask the military officer about Professor Long. His gaze lingered on Professor Long's face for almost the same amount of time as he did on other professors, except that his gaze lingered on the shiny forehead for a short while longer. It would be considered intentional if he didn't look at Professor Long. The purpose of the meeting that day was to teach the new chief advisor of the military a lesson. 11 experts and scholars with the most experience and knowledge in the annular base and the whole of the military were appointed as the teachers. The information given by Xin Yunmai was a secret, not knowledge. The war between the humans and the sea of dark matter that had lasted more than 100,000 years contained a great deal of information and knowledge in many aspects. They had to teach all of it to Jingjiu as soon as possible. When he visited the annular base and the city the day before, the military officer had given him a preliminary introduction, such as the classification of the monsters of the sea of dark matter. Yet, in the class that day, the classification of the monsters of the sea of dark matter was broken down into more than 300 types, not including the subspecies that were not mentioned due to the lack of information. The humans had used many different weapons and tactics to destroy the monsters. The outline of the war had been shown on the light screen for half a minute. As for the history of the war and the related history of the recovery of the civilization and the details of the reappearance of the sea of dark matter, there was a great deal of information. In the eyes of these experts and scholars, it would take at least 60 days for this chief advisor of the military to master all of them, even though he had the same wisdom and knowledge as the young Master Shun, a good memory and a strong mental strength. The problem was which field of knowledge he should learn first. Jingjiu didn't like wasting his time on these matters. Hearing the arguments of the experts in various fields in the meeting room, he said, "Let's do it together." Chapter 859. The quarrels among the specialists in the meeting room had abruptly ceased, and everybody fixed their gazes on Jingjiu. They were puzzled, wondering what he meant by this. Was he going to fight? 1 against 30? A few specialists were displeased to hear this, showing a mocking and disdainful expression in their eyes, but they didn't say anything. Jingju didn't care what these people were thinking. "Separate them," he said to the military officer. The military officer acted quickly. It didn't take long for the meeting room to be divided into 11 small compartments, one for each specialist. Sitting on a comfortable chair, Jingju looked at the display on the terminal that looked like a huge screen. The data of various fields and subjects flowed like running water on the screen and then entered his eyes. This method of learning was more efficient for him, just like what he had done in the Guoqing temple and later in the apartment. When he encountered a problem with the data or had a different opinion, he would ask the specialists in the relevant fields, and the specialists would answer him immediately. The questions he asked and the answers of the specialists were displayed on each other's screen through the data, so they didn't need the slow and low-end communication like the sound. The special feature of the spores lies in their different molecular structures. They can withstand high temperatures, but they can also withstand the cold like other subspecies. They can maintain their vitality even when the temperature is close to absolute zero, and they will die naturally as time elapses. As such, the range of infection of the first generation of spores in the universe is fixed. The furthest recorded is 92 astronomical units of the main planet. Of course, this doesn't take into account the distance when the spores attach to the battleships and pass through the warped void. Yes. The most regrettable thing is that these dark monsters can pass through the warped void. Nobody knows why. It's probably because the dimensional rifts have something to do with the warped void. The physicists have a conjecture that the warped voids are their normal space in the world of dark matter. 3 degrees Celsius above absolute zero is the survival limit of these monsters. It might be a coincidence or a metaphysical phenomenon, but it's the same as the background radiation of the universe on the other side of the sea of dark matter. According to the result calculated by the Fuz transformation, the proliferation coefficient is between 2.6 and 3.4. The miniaturization of the gravitational lens was completed 4 years ago, but the 3 fleets still can't discover the dark matter directly, let alone capture it. There's no problem with using Planet Qingqiu's scythe for indirect observation. According to the statistics of the cases, their spore production rate is the lowest, so it's the safest. The strength of the mother nest's defense lies in its materials. In the past 30 years, 4 new elements and even more special-shaped alloys have been discovered, but none of them are stronger than the mother nest's materials. According to the data of the ancient civilization and the analysis of more than 300 cases, there is a certain probability of breaking through the mother nest's defenses with super-powerful laser beams and neutrino weapons. There is no social structure, but there are social classes. There is no intelligence, but there are instincts. The distinction between intelligence and instincts does not exist in a philosophical sense. Okay. Let's not talk about philosophy. Dai Su's emotional fluctuations should be regarded as the direction of some kind of fluctuation. 94% of the fleet's nuclear bombs have been replaced with 7-phase bombs. The Academy of Sciences calls the process of dimensional rifts disintegrating melting because it requires a lot of light and heat. The picture is quite similar. The specific temperature requirement is about 7 million degrees. No life or dark life can withstand this kind of temperature, so even if the energy overflow is very wasteful, the military still insists on using nuclear bombs as the weapon of choice, laser and microwave weapons as the backup, and physical weapons are abandoned. There are 7 models in the initial stage of a fugitive fleet, and 6 of them will cause the fleet to be completely destroyed within 100 years. The achievements of mental imprinting in mind control involve some top-secret information. These people in the conference room should not have come into contact with it, including me. The ring kept emitting a faint light that was invisible to the naked eye. The data on the light screen kept flowing, and new questions and answers appeared from time to time. Jingzhou read the information very quickly, and the questions became more and more profound. The expressions of the experts gradually changed. They were no longer in the mood to watch the show, and they became much more serious when reading the information and answering the questions. The conference room was very quiet. Only the faint static sound of the light screen and the sound of chairs moving could be heard. The constant movement of chairs indicated that some experts were getting nervous. They stared at the light screen in the cubicles, afraid that they might miss some important information and make a mistake in answering the questions. Seeing the scene, the officers in charge of the affairs felt it quite amazing, thinking that it was more like the consultants were testing the knowledge of these experts instead of teaching them a lesson. It should be noted that these experts were the top scholars in the annular base and even in the entire Federation of the Milky Way. As the questions and answers continued, the experts entered the most serious state of research, which was the same as when they were in the laboratory. Some of them took off their bow ties rudely, some of them wiped their glasses with the hem of their shirts, some of them put their legs on the desks, and some of them scratched their hair. It was noon after more than 300 questions, but none of them felt hungry, they just felt a bit tired. Jingjiu sensed the mental state of the expert. Stroking the ring on his finger, he asked, "Do you have any more questions?" Normally, it should be the experts who asked him this question, but it was he who asked them. One of the experts replied uncertainly, "It seems that there are no more questions. Do you have any more questions?" "I don't have any questions. It's just that the possibility mentioned by Mr. Consultant has given me some new ideas. I'd like to go back to the laboratory to do some calculations. I also have some new ideas. If Mr. Consultant wants to study by himself in the afternoon, can I ask for leave? I'm a bit confused at the moment. I'd like to go and have a drink. Who wants some? Let's go, let's go." The experts were talking at the same time in the conference room. Jingjiu got up and walked to the window, looking at the green grassland and the darker forest outside, as well as the pearl-like lakes in the distance. This was the deep underground of the annular base. The window was fake, and the scenery outside the window was also fake. Such a scene reminded him of the cell in the Sword Jail and the Snow Girl. "I have one last question. Looking at this beautiful world, Jingjiu thought of the miserable world on the ground and the humans who had died soundlessly in that city. What was the weapon used by the distant ancient civilization on this planet? An antimatter gun?" The conference room suddenly became very quiet. After an unknown period of time, the voice of one of the experts rang out. "The Research Institute has always regarded that weapon as a substellar weapon. However, according to the calculation of the residual energy waves, that weapon had a large amount of energy left when it was activated. It might even have used the lowest energy. This means that if the distant ancient civilization had wanted to, they could have directly destroyed this planet or even a celestial body of an even larger size." Another expert said regretfully, "We've studied the remnants of the war on this planet for many years, but unfortunately, we didn't get any results by reverse analysis. The antimatter gun is indeed one of the conjectures, but there's no evidence. In my opinion, it's not very likely. The main reason is that the missing information is too serious. I even suspect that someone had erased the information back then." He was talking about the governing authorities of the distant ancient civilization. Jingjiu was silent for a moment and said, "Thank you." That afternoon, Jingjiu didn't go to the conference room again. He spent most of his time by the window, looking at the black wasteland in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. However, the conference room was still preserved, and the dozen or so experts from various fields didn't leave either. As he looked at the black wasteland by the window, Jingjiu was thinking of many things. Innumerable numbers, symbols, formulas and functions appeared in his awareness, and then they were rearranged and rearranged. The war between the humans and the Sea of Dark Matter had lasted for more than 100,000 years, and it was even longer than the longest epic poem, with a great deal of information and related knowledge. Even Jingju needed some time to organize, analyze and digest the information. During the process, he would encounter some new problems, and he would need the help of these experts. The days went on for a few days. She didn't forget her work. She boiled an iron pot of hot tea for Jingju every morning and night. It was unclear where she went during the rest of the time. She would come back late at night with a smell of alcohol. Shin Yunmai had returned to the Central Star Fleet. It was unclear if he had some other mission, as he hadn't been seen in the last few days. One day the study was over. In the eyes of the experts and professors, it would have taken them at least 60 days to complete the massive project, but it had taken them only 9 days. The experts were well aware that Jingju had an extraordinary learning ability, so they accepted the fact easily. They dispersed with a sentimental mood and went back to their own studies. That night, Jingju contacted Ran Handong through the ring and inquired about the whereabouts of the Central Star Fleet. Ran Handong knew that the Central Star Fleet was by the edge of the Sea of Dark Matter, but she didn't have any further information. She reported the recent situation of Zhonglizi and the situation in the Federation of the Milky Way before Jingju could ask her. Everything was fine. As the door of the room was opened, She walked in with a tired expression and put the iron pot on the stove. The tea in the iron pot began to boil, exuding a greasy smell because the tea had been boiled for a long time. She bade Jingju good night and lay on the bed to sleep. Jingju waved his hand and used the sword fire to burn the alcohol molecules and the molecules related to the smell in the air into nothingness. He walked to the window and saw the sword light in the night sky. The transparent window quivered slightly, and his figure disappeared, turning into a sword light in the night sky. She opened her eyes and looked at the spot in front of the window, her small face devoid of any emotion. It didn't take long for Jingju to arrive at the high peak in the south of the planet. Sitting by the cliff's edge, Shin Yunmai held a pot of alcohol in his chest and a chicken leg in his hand, looking a bit awkward. It was because his empty left sleeve looked like a piece of white silk fluttering in the dark night. "Is it broken?" asked Jingju after taking a look at it. Shin Yunmai uttered Chapter 860. It was evident that Shin Yunmai had imitated Jingju's Jingju didn't say anything. He knew that Shin Yunmai would say that he had learned from Lu Ci if he told him. He was still annoyed that Lu Ci had blocked the heavenly punishment by the West Ocean, so he didn't want to hear this name. His line of sight fell on the flagon held by Shin Yunmai. The flagon was made of clay, so it was probably an antique. Most importantly, the molecules of the wine in the jug had a smell that he was familiar with. It was neither malt wine nor barley wine. It didn't have the peat, the sweetness of sugar cane, or the fragrance of star anise or cinnamon. It was a clean and strong white wine. You can smell it? It seems that the logistics department has copied it well. Looking at Jingju's expression, Shin Yunmai seemed to have forgotten the fact that he was severely wounded. "I'll record it for them," he said complacently. Jingju said, "There is a kind of small golden flower in the south, but it doesn't exist in this world. The taste is a bit different." This was the wine Nan Wang liked to drink. It was also the wine he had drunk the most. "We can't expect the world to be as perfect as we are." Shin Yunmai removed the clay seal and took a sip. After savoring the aftertaste for a while, he continued, "After reading your work, I wanted to imitate it. So I gathered a technical team to tackle the problem and bothered Li Chunyang a few times. The members of the group were probably the highly skilled craftsmen in the wineries in the Federation of the Milky Way, or the master wine-tasting masters on the vacation planet. In a sense, what Jingju had been learning these last few days was the same way. Jingju remembered that the great Grandmaster Daoyuan had told him that the immortal Chunyang liked drinking wine very much. It seemed that this kind of wine had already appeared in the south at that time. Shin Yunmai handed the flagon to Jingju. No, thanks, said Jingjiu. Shin Yunmai didn't mind it. He took another 2 sips and said while shooting a glance at Jingjiu, "Don't you want to ask me why I lost an arm?" Jingjiu thought that it was just a broken arm. There was no need to ask about it. He was good at cutting off limbs, so he had seen many people with broken arms over the last 1,000 years, such as Jian Shilai. Fine, losing an arm is indeed not a big deal. I have 12 spare parts in the fleet. I can just install a new one and do some technical upgrades. Shin Yunmai picked up the drumstick and tore off a piece. After chewing it a few times, he swallowed it and said, "But it's a little expensive. It'll be troublesome during the budget meeting. I'll have to quarrel and threaten people again." Jingjiu had heard many stories and knew that he had to bear the responsibility at this time. He asked emotionlessly, "How expensive?" Shin Yunmai asked after some thought, 7 battleships of the latest model. Jingjiu knew a lot of things, but he had no concept of the value of resources. After thinking about it, he realized that it was indeed expensive. The price is not a problem. Shin Yunmai looked at the drumstick in his hand and suddenly lost his appetite. Of course, his body's need for food was a simulated program. He threw the drumstick down the cliff and said while puffing his cheeks, "It's because I think it's boring to fight." The Central Star Fleet had conducted a maneuver by the edge of the Sea of Dark Matter. Nominally, it was to prepare for the future star chain plan. In fact, it was to let the soldiers on the fleet get used to this kind of fighting style. Nobody had expected that 17 battleships would be attacked by the Sea of Dark Matter, or in other words, they had expected it but hadn't predicted it. 20,000 soldiers turned into monsters and attacked their own fleet. It was a simple statement, but it turned out to be an unimaginable disaster in reality. The chaos grew more violent and the fleet was severely damaged. In order to prevent the storm from affecting a larger area, Shin Yunmai had no choice but to take action in person. He led hundreds of military swordsmen in armor to fight against the monsters in the space. The price he paid was the death of more than 100 swordsmen and one of his arms. His arm could be repaired, just like any other part of his body. The problem was that the damage had indeed happened in his spiritual world. The high peaks of planet 857 were concentrated near the equator. This mountain was very high. The cliff edge where Jingjiu and Shin Yunmai sat was about 7,000 meters above the ground. The meter was the standard unit for measuring distance in the Federation of the Milky Way. Nobody knew why it was called meter. Those who knew it might have disappeared in the long river of history. The drumstick left Shin Yunmai's long and handsome fingers and fell to the ground after a long time in the cold air, making a "paw" sound. The gravity on this planet was weaker than that on the main planet. The sound of a drumstick falling to the ground could be heard from 7,000 meters away. It was because Jingjiu and Shin Yunmai were the strongest humans on this planet. If they could be counted as humans. If this planet still has some living spores, how long do you think it will take for this drumstick to become a monster? All of a sudden, Shin Yunmai raised a very strange and even absurd question. Jingjiu had not attended classes in vain these days. He knew that the infection did not only affect living things, but also the organic matter. He said, "Most of the spores exist in the form of a small group of bacteria. If one of them is alive, all of them will be alive. The number of the spores varies from hundreds to tens of thousands. It will only take 2 hours for the spores to become a monster." That's right. That's why I often think that it's fortunate that the infection happened fast enough. Otherwise, many tragedies would have taken place according to human morality. Having said that, Shin Yunmai looked at the stars in the night sky expressionlessly. It seemed that he found many things very boring. It was easy to understand what he meant. For example, when his daughter was infected, her family could do nothing but watch her turn into a monster. She also knew that death, or something even more horrible than death, was waiting for her. She would have a mental breakdown and go crazy. She would crawl along the data cable from the third floor to the ground and scream, cry, and laugh in the street in her pajamas. Of course, it was also possible that her throat would be slit by her brother with a knife before she could do anything. Then, the police car or the ambulance would arrive. Her brother would raise his hands and shout that he was innocent and brave, and he would wink at his parents to prove his innocence. Jingjiu could understand it, but he did not care too much about it. It was because such things happened all the time in the life community. It was only because some unexpected incidents happened too frequently that they attracted more attention. As a result, it became an ethical issue, a moral issue, and even a social issue that was worth discussing. Shin Yunmai said, "I like talking with you because you know what I mean. I'm not like those people who always talk too much nonsense and end up talking like chickens and ducks." Jingjiu replied, Shin Yunmai couldn't help but laugh when he thought of his response at the beginning of the conversation. While laughing, he left the cliff's edge and flew toward the night sky, leaving a trail of blue light in his wake. The light was filled with intense and seemingly substantial energy waves. Jingjiu did some calculations and figured that it should be a superparticle nuclear power furnace. "Go back and have a good rest. I'll take you to see a person and some stars tomorrow." The mass of blue light flew out of the atmosphere and headed toward a battleship. Shin Yunmai's voice was still echoing between heaven and earth. Sound was the sound wave produced by the vibration of an object. It needed a medium to transmit. His voice could penetrate the vacuum, which meant that there must be some kind of particle in the vacuum, or the sound wave had mutated into another form. There were many problems that needed to be solved, such as this and others. Many problems could not be solved until the end. As a result, some predecessors believed that there was no such thing as reason in the universe. Jingjiu did not accept this view. His Tao did not accept this kind of nihilism. The next morning, the sky was still dark. Of course, there was not much difference between day and night on planet 857. It was difficult to see the moment of dawn. Jingjiu did not wait for Huaxi. He brewed an iron pot of tea by himself. The tea was not strong, but it was perfect to his taste. It was much better than Gu Qing's. After drinking half a cup of tea, Jingjiu walked out of the room and saw Shin Yunmai leaning against the wall. His left arm had been restored to its original state. Jingjiu took a look at it and confirmed that the new arm's mechanical structure, microelectric induction, and material strength were the same as before. It seemed that he had not had enough time to modify it because he was in a hurry. A real master did not depend on whether he would turn around to look at the explosion, but on whether he needed to sleep or not. Neither Jingjiu nor Shin Yunmai needed to sleep. The experts and scholars in the research institute were also freaks who seldom slept. Along with the beeping sound, the authorization was confirmed. They walked into the research institute and saw the brightly lit laboratories and the scholars whose heads were even brighter than the lights. Professor Long's head was also very bright. Jingjiu did not even look at him. He followed Shin Yunmai into the meeting room. Someone was already waiting for them in the meeting room. It was a middle-aged professor. His eyes were calm like the spring breeze, and he looked amiable. But if one looked more carefully, one would find something special about him. It was obvious that this middle-aged professor had been seriously injured recently. The smell of the psychotropic drug and genetic recombination materials was very pungent, even more pungent than the smell of alcohol on Huaxi. Jingjiu said, "I didn't expect to see you so early, Mr. Xing." Chapter 861. Jingjiu didn't mind the unpleasant smell on this middle-aged professor, and he didn't block his senses either. He respected both Yamatsai and this person. Xingju was the 7th house master of Yamatsai. He was the most respected sage in the history of Chaotian. He had a noble character, an extraordinary bearing, and a caring heart, even better than Buqiuxiao. He had ascended more than 7,000 years ago. It was said that the first Grand Master of the Guoqing Temple founded the Zen sect after receiving his instruction. Jingzhu recognized him because of the game, The Path Toward Heaven. In the game, Xingzhu had stayed in the 1,000-mile windy corridor for too long, which triggered the calculation program he had set up and was selected by the big data processing system. As Jingzhou and General Li conversed in the art gallery of the South Pole on the main planet, Ran Handong was certain that Xingzhu and another ascendant were monitoring them outside the atmosphere. Then, he left with the fleet. He should have come to the Sea of Dark Matter. Jingzhu felt surprised, as he didn't expect the other party to appear in front of him so easily. Xingzhu didn't expect the other party to know him, shooting a glance at Shen Yunmai. Shen Yunmai exclaimed with raised eyebrows, "Don't look at me like that. I'm not your student. I didn't say anything." He was the son of the Grand Master of Aoyama, and his cultivation state was not inferior to these ascendants. As such, he didn't show any courtesy to the likes of General Li and Xingzhu. Xingzhu smiled and asked Jingzhou, "Immortal, you said it was early. When did you think you could see me?" "When we fight." It was true that Jingzhou didn't have the habit of lying, except when it was unnecessary to do so. He had prepared for the worst during the trip to the 857 base. Unexpectedly, one of the opponents he had prepared had already appeared in front of him before he could put the things he had prepared to use. Xingzhu understood what Jingzhou meant, saying, "Any schemes and fights caused by different paths are a foolish waste of resources under the circumstances. The sages, the ascendants, and that person were all the wisest and most outstanding beings in the world. They could of course figure it out and ensure that the human society wouldn't go astray. The problem was that in human history, the divergence of paths was often forcefully bestowed with some sacred meaning on a spiritual level, which then led to unimaginably stupid consequences. The shamans and the Union government share the same goal as us," Xingzhu said. "The Sea of Dark Matter and those monsters don't have self-awareness, and they won't accept the surrender of the humans. This is our greatest fortune." This sentence was very realistic, so it was very real. If the Sea of Dark Matter were the evil empire depicted in the literature and art, the human civilization would have been in a state of internal strife since the ancient times and would have disintegrated and destroyed itself before the arrival of the enemy. Jingzhu understood this when he was at the hot spring, which was why he accepted General Li's invitation to have a look. This journey, as well as the studies he had done in the past few days, and the inspection work that followed were actually the inspection of him by General Li, Xingzhu, and the other ascendants of the previous generation. It was still an inspection. He didn't like it. Xingzhu saw his displeasure and said, "This is the last time." Jingzhou asked, "Why?" Xingzhu let out a smile, saying nothing. Hearing this, Shen Yunmai couldn't help but roll his eyes. Jingzhou destroyed the battleship, killed the immortal Qi Song, wounded him severely in the building of the military headquarters, and confronted General Li in the South Pole. It was all for the purpose of inspecting this matter. It was merely a trivial matter, and he didn't suffer any losses. Why did he keep mentioning it like a naggy ant? "I have another question," said Jingzhou. During the course of the study, he had raised many questions to the most outstanding specialists in various fields of human civilization. The last question he raised was what weapon the distant ancient civilization had used to destroy planet 857. Xingzhu was aware of this, saying, "There should be an answer to this question. General Li will tell you in person." "What should we do next?" asked Jingzhou. This saint had just joined hands with Shen Yunmai to fight against the nuclear fleet of the planet. He was severely wounded and had no time to treat his wounds, so he came to the 857 base to meet Jingzhou. "It must be an important matter. Though you don't like it, this inspection of you is over." Xingzhu continued while looking at Jingzhou, "You'll see the real secret, and it might be the only answer for the humans. Secrets could be classified into many levels. The real secret needed more protection. When they walked out of the meeting room, they found that the research institute had been cleared. The laboratories on both sides of the passageway were sealed off from the outside. There was no one in the passageway, and all the monitoring devices had been disabled. Shin Yunmai still wore an indifferent expression on his face. It seemed that he was not interested in the secret, or in other words, he didn't think highly of the plan the Ascendants had worked so hard on for so many years. There was a wall at the end of the alloy passageway. There was neither an elevator nor a spaceship behind the wall. There was only a dark and bottomless hole leading to the deeper part of the planet. Xingju jumped into the hole and soon disappeared. The old guys think this is the simplest and most effective safety measure. Nobody can pass through the underground passageway of several thousand miles except for themselves. You know, the deeper one goes into the center of the planet, the hotter it gets. The bodies of the local swordsmen haven't been tempered by the fairy energy, so they can't bear the heat. Moreover, there are some traps in the passageway that only the Ascendants can understand. Shin Yunmai continued in a mocking tone, but I feel that they regard it as a rabbit hole in a fairy tale and think that they can find a beautiful new world after jumping into it. Jingjiu didn't like Shin Yunmai's sarcastic way of talking because Zhuoruzhui was too annoying. You go first, he said. Shin Yunmai complained, you're as boring as my father. Are the people of the Aoyama sect all so boring? Let's go, said Jingjiu. Shin Yunmai felt that he didn't appreciate Jingjiu as much as before, so he jumped into the hole. Jingjiu followed him. It was pitch black in the passageway, devoid of any light. But it didn't take long for light to appear. The shapeless barrier formed a transparent column. Countless streams of lava gushed out like tidewater and slapped on the outside of the column. It was a shocking scene. Jingjiu looked at the fiery red ocean of lava and sensed the warmth on the other side, feeling a sense of familiarity. The lava in the mantle passed quickly, and the light disappeared again. Jingjiu didn't do anything. He just kept falling downward, following the guidance of gravity, into the seemingly endless darkness. The shapeless barrier that formed the transparent wall was obviously a Taoist magic treasure. The passageway was filled with the wills of sword and the energy of talismans. Some of the talismans were still in the process of dispersing, which should be the means Xingju used to clear the way. As for the wills of sword, they must have been dispelled by Shin Yunmai. Judging from the fragments of sword breath that fell like pink raindrops, he had dispelled them perfectly. Jingjiu had to admit that this child's mastery of the inherited heaven sword was better than his. But it was nothing. From Lu Xi to Imochi, Guananshan, Zhuoruzhui, and Lu Shisui, many disciples of the Aoyama sect had mastered the inherited heaven sword better than Jingjiu. All of a sudden, light appeared in front of him again. His line of sight passed through the transparent barrier and looked toward the source of light in the distance. He vaguely saw a large semicircular building. It was unknown what material it was made of, but it could easily withstand the high temperature and high pressure in this place. Countless energy nodes appeared in the compact geological structure, looking like stars. Energy fluctuations could be vaguely sensed from them. It seemed that this was the super-energy furnace left by the distant civilization. Those energy nodes indicated that wireless transmission was indeed the mainstream technical standard in those days. The light disappeared again. Jingjiu continued to fall downward. Gradually, he saw Shin Yunmai's white robe. He didn't swing back and forth like a pendulum as depicted in the sci-fi novels. Relying on the formation, he stopped on a cliff somewhere. He was in the center of the earth, but he couldn't feel the temperature and pressure that should be there. There was nothing special about the place as far as his sight could reach. The only peculiar scene was probably the floating stones outside the cliff. There was a gate on the cliff. Xingju pressed his palm on the bronze mirror beside the gate, and it sunk slightly. Along with a heavy but smooth sound of friction, the gate opened slowly, revealing another deep and gloomy passageway. There were many cells on both sides of the deep and gloomy passageway. The stone walls and the superalloy doors were attached with electric currents, particle turbulence nets, and powerful formations. Jingjiu had never seen some of these formations before. Jingjiu thought of the sword jail at the bottom of the Shangda Peak. The prisoners locked in these cells should be more formidable than those demons and devil men of the underworld in the sword jail. Xingju walked toward the other end of the passageway. He didn't pay attention to the deathly stillness and destructive intent behind the alloy doors, nor did he give any introduction to Jingjiu. He knew that Jingjiu should be able to guess what was behind the doors. Without a doubt, the prisoners locked here were the beings infected by the darkness, namely, those formidable monsters. Jingjiu thought that the dead dog should like living here, because he hadn't eaten these new species yet. And this passageway was very spacious, so it didn't feel like walking through a dog hole. If the dangerous monsters were locked in the cells on both sides of the passageway, what was at the end of the passageway? Jingjiu followed the two of them to the end of the passageway. It didn't take long for him to walk out of the passageway and arrive at another platform on the cliff. There was a large space in front of the platform on the cliff, filled with a faint gray fog. No mountain peak could be seen intermittently in the fog. A gust of wind blew over from somewhere, dispersing the fog and revealing a patch of starry sky. The WeChat Q&A questions will be collected until tomorrow night. Everybody, hurry up. The questions have expired, and you have to wait for the next one. Chapter 862. They were at the center of the earth. The flat cliffs, the passageways, and this space were all man-made, so it was hard for a wind with a clear purpose to come into being naturally. Jingjiu knew it was Xingju's magic, but he calculated it without looking at Xingju. He was certain that this sage was very powerful and was only slightly weaker than himself. The fog had dispersed, revealing the dazzling starry sky. Innumerable stars appeared in this huge space. Of course, it was not real, it was a kind of simulation. Jingjiu found the ocean of stars familiar, and he soon realized that it was the star chart of the local galaxy that he had seen many times. There were at least hundreds of billions of stars in the sky, which looked like a real picture in front of the three of them. Humans and other intelligent beings could easily develop a feeling of awe when they looked up at the starry sky, but most of the time they chose to ignore it. The starry sky was too far away from the human world to affect their busy and arduous life in the human world. Xin Yunmai and Xingju were not ordinary people, but humans of the highest level. So they often thought about the relationship between themselves and the universe. The universe would not laugh at their thoughts. It just looked at them calmly and indifferently, which made them feel the fragility and insignificance of life, and then a strong feeling of emptiness arose in them. When I came here for the first time, I was shocked by this ocean of stars for a long time, and then I felt sad for a long time. Looking at the starry sky outside the cliff, Xin Yunmai said with a complicated expression, "It was like the time when I was in the hot spring when I was little." Jingjiu said, "It's indeed tiring to travel on a journey without a destination." This is the star chart of the local galaxy left by the distant ancient civilization. According to what that person said and the archaeological findings, the center of every habitable planet of the distant ancient civilization had such a star chart. However, most of the habitable planets were destroyed in that war, and the star charts of the places like the Stargate base had also vanished. Xingju continued, "These star charts are the real-time reflections of the real universe. In other words, this place should be called a large observatory." There were indeed many secrets on this planet, including the materials he had read on the Scorching Sun battleship. "What's the answer?" asked Jingjiu. In the meeting room of the Research Institute, Xingju said that he had passed the inspection and could learn the biggest secret, which was the real answer of the human race. Xingju raised his arm and pointed to a remote place outside the cliff. As his fingertip pointed, the universe there became brighter, making it easier to observe. This starry sky was a real-time reflection of the real universe. Naturally, there were not only stars but also various astronomical objects, such as black holes and planets. The local galaxy that spanned 10 million light-years had become a star map in the core of the planet. Naturally, it had shrunk countless times. Whether it was the giant stars or the black holes, they were just bright or dark spots in the mathematical sense. It was even more impossible to see the existence of any planet. Logically speaking, the nebula was hard to see due to its thinness, but at this moment, it became a little more conspicuous. The space there was brightened, and the nebula blocked the light of the star behind it, so the core became darker, and the edge was like a burning flame. The nebula was light blue. Of course, this was a simulation of visible light. Its biggest characteristic was that it was extremely huge. It was hard to imagine how it was formed in the first place. Xingju knew about this nebula. Back when he was collecting data and knowledge on the Starfield network, he had many questions about this nebula. Looking at the nebula from the perspective of Planet 857, that day, Xingju had more questions, and he had also vaguely understood something. The nebula had two large projecting surfaces, which were thousands of light-years long. It was unclear how many dusts and broken pieces were hovering in the middle of the nebula in silence. The light blue light shot out from the projecting surfaces. It looked like a blue butterfly when seen from a distance. Xingju had seen this butterfly in many places, like the place where the assassin in overalls sat and the bookmark in General Li's office. The ascendants like General Li thought that they were the evolved humans and the chosen saviors of the world. Chaotian was probably a shelter and a laboratory arranged by that god, or a cocoon. They called themselves the Cocoon Breakers and used the butterfly as their symbol. Now that he thought about it, it should have something to do with this patch of blue nebula. Xingju asked, "You should have learned a great deal after coming to this world, and you have learned a great deal of history and information over the last few days. Have you thought of a way to defeat the Sea of Dark Matter?" "No," replied Xingju, who had discussed this issue with Hua Shi. If they couldn't figure out a way in the end, they had no choice but to flee, even though the journey was hopeless and had no destination. The human civilization will never be able to eliminate the threat of the Sea of Dark Matter by relying solely on defense. It's because the invasion of the darkness is soundless, and we have no idea how to defend against it. The distant ancient civilization had attempted the interstellar migration, such as strengthening the walls and clearing the fields, but it was proven to be ineffective in the end. It was because the Sea of Dark Matter was expanding too fast. What should we do then? In order to solve the problem of the Sea of Dark Matter, we have to start from the root and block up those cracks in the dimension space. We all know that the cracks in the dimension space can be eroded at a temperature higher than 7 million degrees, and the central temperature of the nuclear bombs can meet this condition. However, once the cracks in the dimension space appear, they will span the length of the entire planetary system. It will take too much energy to use the nuclear bombs to destroy them. Even though the distant ancient civilization had almost unlimited resources, they still couldn't do it. Xingju went on, "Fortunately, there are countless nuclear bombs exploding in our universe." Xingju knew that he was referring to the stars. Innumerable stars had been burning in the universe for billions of years, and the burning process would continue until they died of natural causes. It seemed that there were innumerable nuclear bombs exploding in those burning stars. The problem was that they were two different things. Xingju said, "The stable stars can absorb the energy on the surface, but they can't utilize the energy in their cores, and the temperature on the surface of most stars is far lower than the temperature needed to destroy the cracks in the space." Xingju said while looking at Xingju calmly and earnestly, "As such, we need to make the stars unstable until they break apart or explode in the end. Weapons of the star state? Asked Jingjiu. The weapons of the star state were weapons that could destroy a star or use a star as a weapon. This definition was simple and even crude, but it was daunting. That's right, said Xingjiu. It's an arrogant and crazy idea, remarked Jingjiu. It was true that this idea was indeed crazy. Making many stars explode in the universe and wiping out those cracks in the dimension space was like a story in science fiction. Anyone in the Federation of the Milky Way who had heard of this plan would be so shocked that they might even pass out. Jingjiu said, even if we have the weapons of the star state, it's still hard to succeed. The distant ancient civilization did it. More precisely, it was that God who did it. Though the whole civilization perished together with the sea of dark matter, the darkness didn't come back to the universe for more than 100,000 years. Xingjiu continued, with the help of that God, we have recovered some information and figured out how that God did it. That patch of nebula is not the trace left by the explosion of a supernova, nor is it born in any other normal way. There used to be a patch of starry sky there. Countless stars were burning there in silence, emitting light and heat and illuminating the beautiful human world. As Jingjiu narrated, the patch of blue nebula grew brighter, as if countless stars were being born in it. It was the most prosperous and concentrated region of the distant ancient civilization. It was also the place where the sea of dark matter first appeared. At the last moment of the distant ancient civilization, that God ignited all the stars. The sea of dark matter disappeared, and the civilization was disrupted. A corner of the universe recovered its tranquility, except that a blue butterfly appeared there. It's not a science fiction story, it's a xianxia story. Don't take it too seriously. It's like the spy story is not a science fiction story, but a martial arts story. I was so bored during the 1-month confinement that I started playing TikTok again to watch the spy stories. I found that they were really interesting. Chapter 863. What a spectacular scene it would be if tens of thousands of stars exploded at the same time. If there were intelligent beings at the edge of the universe, they would be able to see the brightness in that moment, though it would happen hundreds of millions of years later. Looking at the nebula dimming again, Jingjiu remained silent for a long time. Planet 857 was located at the edge of the galaxy, close to the sea of dark matter and the blue nebula. The light, heat, and radiation ejected by tens of thousands of exploding stars couldn't destroy the protective shield. How did a planet like the Stargate base survive the explosion? If there were any humans hiding on these planets at the time, they would have died in that moment. No, they would have died in a few years or a few decades. It was more likely that they had been notified by God, or they had observed the electromagnetic outburst. As a result, they boarded the fleet and headed toward the vast and hopeless universe. Jingjiu didn't know why he was thinking of all this. Looking at the huge nebula in silence, he uttered all of a sudden. Looking at the galaxy where the Federation of the Milky Way was located, this nebula looked more like a seashell than a butterfly. As such, this nebula was given a beautiful name. The Seal of the Sea. The seashell was the seal of the sea. It turned out that the sea was the sea of stars. On his way to the main planet from the Stargate, Jingjiu had passed by the Seal of the Sea and ignited many nuclear bombs there, destroying a new battleship and killing the immortal Qi Song. He had paid attention to the Seal of the Sea many times before that. He had many questions about this nebula, like those astrophysicists and amateur astronomers. The Seal of the Sea was too large, and the background radiation was unimaginably strong. The smooth rules of physics seemed to have lost their effect during the birth of this nebula. Viewed from the distant battleships, the observation points on various planets and the space stations, this patch of nebula looked like a large hole in the cluster of stars, looking unnatural in every way. It was not until now that he knew the reason. This patch of nebula was not formed naturally. There had been 30,000 stars here, and it was unclear how many planets were inhabited by humans. All of them had perished together with the sea of dark matter more than 100,000 years ago, becoming a ray of light that illuminated the universe. Xingju said, "The information is incomplete. We don't know what kind of situation the humans were in at the time and how large the sea of dark matter was. But one thing is certain. Most of the galaxies of the distant ancient civilization were surrounded by the sea of dark matter, like isolated islands, with no chance of survival." "Go on," said Jingzhou. Xingju said, "With history as a guide, we need to prepare in advance." Having said that, he of the sea of the sea of the stars. Countless runes floated out of his sleeves and turned into golden fragments in front of his slender fingers. The starry sky slowly shifted. Of stars of the star of time as the human beings were revived and of human beings. The sea of dark matter reappeared along with the recovery of the human civilization, and the main space it occupies is here. Xingju's statement was widely accepted by the current scientists, and it had indirectly given rise to those who had surrendered and those who were extreme pastoral. The sea of dark matter and those life forms it has infected have no intelligence and self-awareness. All they have is the instinct of devouring. Yet, this instinct has an innate calculating ability which is almost like the Tao. After hundreds of years of observation and calculation, we have come to a bad conclusion. The sea of dark matter will enshroud this galaxy in about 300 years. Jingzhu said, "There is still enough space in this galaxy." Xingju said, "If the humans only migrate to the inner part of this galaxy, like what the distant ancient civilization tried to do in the early stage, the sea of dark matter will expand faster and faster until it occupies the whole galaxy." Though it sounded hard to imagine, it had already happened and was happening in fact. The sea of dark matter was not a concrete object, and occupying it was not like sending troops to land on it. To describe it in a more understandable way, it was a kind of space. However, in comparison to the space of the main universe, the physical rules here were completely different. Any life form that entered the space would be transformed into a dark monster. If the sea of dark matter expanded to the whole galaxy, it meant that the physical rules in the galaxy would be changed. The humans and other life forms would have no choice but to die, and it was impossible for them to escape. 857 and the Stargate base have been preserved until now, which means that the distant galaxies are not affected much when the permanent star explodes. Sometimes we wonder if the distant ancient civilization likes to empty the planets because of this plan. In short, since the humans will be forced to migrate to another galaxy 300 years later, why don't they do it earlier? The humans in the Federation of the Milky Way intended to migrate to another galaxy. Though it sounded like a magnificent and difficult undertaking, it was actually not difficult to accomplish. The main body of the human civilization was the 3 interplanetary fleet. They could migrate freely in the galaxy as long as they had enough resources, ores, and automatic machines, like the nomads in the stories. It seemed that General Li and the others were not interested in the government of the Federation of the Milky Way and the rule of the planet. It turned out that they had been preparing for it a long time ago. The only regret was that the human civilization could only migrate to the local galaxy by means of the warped spacetime holes. They couldn't migrate to the real universe outside. Otherwise, the threat of the sea of dark matter would be nothing. Shin Yunmai took over the task of explaining. He was the commander of the Central Star Fleet, so he was more familiar with the details of the task. The 3 fleets used the nuclear bombs to set up a large net to lock down the sea of dark matter. The so-called Star Chain Plan is merely a show for the populace. It's impossible to believe it. He took out a thick tobacco from somewhere and put it in his mouth. He snapped his fingers and ignited it with the sword fire. Our real plan is to ignite these stars like that god after the humans migrate to the neighboring galaxy, he said vaguely. The starry sky outside the cliff was as tranquil as the real universe. Those stars were all ablaze and didn't need to be ignited again, but there was no better way to describe it than to ignite them. This plan was called the Star Igniting Plan. The Star Igniting Plan had two major difficulties. They were not the migration of the human civilization, but the act of igniting the stars. How to ignite the stars first? Which stars would be chosen? Which stars should be chosen first? What was the order of igniting these stars? How to ensure that these stars would melt all the cracks in the dimension space and turn the sea of dark matter into nothingness after they were ignited? It sounded like a simple matter, but it was actually unimaginably complicated. In order to blow up a building, thousands of explosive points had to be calculated precisely, let alone a patch of the starry sky. How to ignite the stars? It was not the order and calculation that mattered here. It was the most important and fundamental technical issue. The Star Chain Plan was a propaganda method employed by the military to comfort the populace, and so was the weapon of the Star State. Those rumors had no basis in reality. The humans were still a great many light years away from such a level of civilization. We have 300 years to find such a weapon. Xingju used the word find rather than invent or create. The distant ancient civilization had reached such a level of civilization, and that God had used such a weapon. Even though that civilization had disappeared in the long river of history, it should have left many traces. Like the city on the northern plateau of the main planet, the Mecca in the Museum of Shower City, and the oil painting filled with yellow sunflowers. He continued, however, we have to complete the calculation first and be ready to carry out the plan before we can find such a weapon. Why did you tell me all this? Asked Jingjiu. Like I told you, the old guy has given you so many benefits that he wants you to do something for him. Shin Yunmai threw the tobacco in his hand into the starry sky outside the cliff, saying, the leader of the humans and the sole talent of Aoyama, you of course have to think about it. Xingju added, most importantly, you have to decide the order and method of igniting the stars. Why? Asked Jingjiu. Xingju said, we're willing to give you this important historical task because you're the most powerful ascendant of the human race. In other words, if Chaotian is the laboratory of that god, you're the most suitable candidate he has chosen. Moreover, we've read the story you wrote and are aware of your ability. The greater the ability, the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. Jingjiu had always avoided this statement, but he had to admit that it was reasonable on the level of cause and effect. What he couldn't understand was that no matter how powerful his calculation ability was and how he could calmly judge the gains and losses and the lives and deaths of billions of people, there were obviously better candidates in this universe. It was the young female priest by the hot spring. Xingju said, that person is still too cold and devoid of warmth. I don't understand, said Jingjiu. Shin Yunmai rubbed the remaining tobacco smell on his fingers and said, they think that her thinking mode is more like that of a mechanical being and not creative enough. Xingju said, you should know that it's not enough to complete the mathematical model and get the final result by relying on supercomputers. It's more important to rely on the intuition of life. Intuition is the probability, said Jingjiu. Shin Yunmai said, I had the same thought as you before. I thought that neither you nor I were as suitable as that person. But I think it's worth a try after reading your mind. Jingjiu pressed, is it because of your calculating ability and the perception of the Tao heart? Shin Yunmai shrugged and said to him, no, it's because of the game of Go that you and Tong Yen played in Zhaoga City. Looking at the outside of the cliff and the billions of stars, Jingjiu had a familiar feeling again. It was not because he was familiar with the relative positions of the stars or the star chart, but because he was familiar with the entire starry sky. Besides the stars, there was nothing but a dark space in the starry sky. The sea of dark matter couldn't be seen, but it was spreading out in those spaces like the dark night. It turned out to be like this. It turned out to be like this. Back at the plum meeting in Xiaoga City, he played a game of Go with Tong Yen. That mountain was called the Chessboard Mountain. That game of Go shocked the whole world and stirred up the wind and rain. As far as he was concerned, playing Go was meaningless because it was too simple. To prove this point, he set up a Go game for Tong Yen. Hundreds of Go pieces flew out from the Go board and the urns, forming a three-dimensional Go game in the air, which was extremely complicated. He saw such a Go game again, but it was tens of thousands of times more complicated than the one in Xiaoga City. The stars were the white Go pieces. The sea of dark matter was the black Go pieces. If one held the white Go pieces, what should one do next? Chapter 864. A scene had occurred in the pavilion on the Chessboard Mountain in Xiaoga City many years ago. Hundreds of black and white Go pieces hovered in the air, forming a complicated structure, which was witnessed by He Zhan, Cain Yang and many other cultivation practitioners. This scene was often described in one word: the stars were scattered all over the chess pieces. The chess pieces were like the stars at the time. The starry sky was like the chess pieces. In fact, compared to the chess game, Jingjiu had a more familiar activity to describe this problem: the sand-piling game. He often slept on the bamboo chair from the small village to the Aoyama sect. The ceramic plate would appear by the bamboo chair from time to time, and he would put a grain of sand on it every once in a while, until it became a picturesque scene of mountains and rivers. Could he use this method on this patch of starry sky? Jingjiu had told Tong Yen that he couldn't even calculate all the variations of this chess game, let alone this patch of starry sky. He had also told Tong Yen that the cultivation practitioners pursued the impossible, but was it possible to achieve the impossible? This patch of starry sky was of course much more complicated than the structure formed by the black and white Go pieces and the grains of sand on the plate. There were tens of thousands of permanent stars in the area where the humans were active. How complicated would the chess game be if the range was extended to the entire local galaxy? The supercalculation was indeed of little help in solving this problem. As Tsing-Ju said, the final decision would be based on the intuition that was close to metaphysics. Was what Tong Yen said right? It would be better if he could come out. Jingjiu said to Tsing-Ju, even if we can succeed, the sea of dark matter will appear as the human civilization advances. It's meaningless. The warped holes were right there, like a treasure hidden in an unguarded storage room. Who could refrain from using it? If they didn't enter the warped holes and didn't use the gravitational field and the high-energy particles, there would be fewer cracks in the space between the dimensions, and the sea of dark matter would take shape much later. However, if they did so, the humans would be locked on the planets forever. Who would accept it except for the extreme pastoral group? He wouldn't accept it. If a thing didn't develop, progress and change, it was no different from death. However, if the humans continued to advance based on their courage, wisdom and the spirit of exploration like they did in the distant ancient civilization or in the Federation of the Milky Way, they would inevitably enter these realms and the sea of dark matter would appear. He did not know how it would be in other parts of the universe, but in this galaxy, it seemed to be an endless cycle of life. Tsing-Ju said, destroying the sea of dark matter will buy more time for the humans. At least they won't be sealed off in 300 years. Next, we will try to slow down the speed of civilization temporarily, trying to extend this process to more than 10,000 years. Then, humans will send a super fleet to the periphery of the galaxy to conduct various experiments, hoping to find a fundamental solution. At the same time, scientists will conduct more theoretical experiments. Jingjiu didn't wait for him to finish and said calmly, "Don't talk nonsense." Xin Yunmai's face was also full of mockery. His opinion was the same as that of Jingjiu. He believed that the ideas of the previous ascendants were in a mess and could not possibly be realized. How much power would it take to forcibly slow down the advancement of civilization? How many people would die if the energy of the civilization exploded? The experiments carried out by the super fleet in the periphery of the galaxy would open up the cracks in the dimensional space. Wouldn't the sea of dark matter pose a threat to the humans if it was far away? Would the super fleet be abandoned? What the hell was the theoretical experiment? Any monkey with a basic knowledge of science would know that it would be a dead end if they did so. The plan to ignite the permanent star was still a pavilion built in the sky. It was no different from talking nonsense to talk about the follow-up. Jingjiu had no desire to listen to the plan any longer. He went back to the ground with Shen Yunmai. Walking in the passageway, his line of sight passed through the French window and saw the well-preserved city. It suddenly occurred to him that the pavilions of the distant ancient civilization were built in the sky. After coming back to the suite, he came to the window on the other side and looked at the black barren land. She put the iron kettle on the stove and threw herself onto the sofa. She started playing games, paying no attention to Jingjiu's mood at the moment, nor did she ask him what he had done that day. Jingjiu knew that she wouldn't ask him, so he kept thinking about those things. There was a saying in the Zen sects, one drink and one peck. It turned out that the Go game in Zhaoga City, the sand table by the bamboo chair, and the stars in the night sky had such a connection and correspondence. Was this the destiny or the heavenly secret? Or was it the arrangement that God had made when he built the laboratory in Chaotian? Planet 857 was located at the edge of the local galaxy. Many stars could be seen in the sky, though they were not very bright. The whole picture of the local galaxy could be seen from here. Of course, it required a very good telescope or a pair of eyes like Jingjiu's. Looking at the indistinct nebula, Jingjiu remained silent for a long time. He had often looked up at the starry sky on the deck of the Stargate Hotel, and he had noticed this patch of nebula. After hearing the story that day, the patch of nebula had a different meaning. It had become a hole in the local galaxy. It was the wound of the distant ancient civilization. In the next moment, his line of sight shifted to a remote spot in the night sky, where there was a white permanent star with an ordinary brightness that could be easily missed. It was the real sun outside Chaotian, located between the Haiying Nebula and the Federation of the Milky Way. The three of them formed a stable spatial structure. The former sea of dark matter was inside. The current sea of dark matter was outside. That was why there was a legend about the heavenly demons of the outside world in Chaotian, and why the ascendants encountered so many dangers when they came to the universe. Fortunately, the heavenly demons of the outside world couldn't break through the boundary between the two worlds with different speeds of light, so they couldn't invade Chaotian. As Jingjiu was thinking of all this, a faint buzzing sound could be heard in the night sky, followed by a slight tremor on the ground. The glass window in front of him was slightly deformed, and the lights and starlight of the circular base became distorted. Shi, who was playing a game, lifted her head and found that Jingjiu had disappeared from the window. All that could be seen was the gentle wind blowing the steam coming out from the iron kettle. No one was running on the dark and desolate barren land, and there was no deathly dust dragon brought up by the white cloth. There was only the buzzing sound from time to time and the faint black smoke rising from the ground. Jingjiu walked to the edge of the cliff and sat down. He lifted his head to look at the dark space. His line of sight followed the sword light moving at a high speed, calculating his speed and analyzing his strength. Shen Yunmai was the combination of two civilizations. He had a higher talent in cultivation than most of the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian, and he was more able to accept the modification of the interstellar civilization. His fighting prowess was indeed formidable. The sages had a very high status among the ascendants, but Xingju might not be able to defeat him. The sword light traveled at an unimaginably high speed, traveling up and down along the edge of the atmosphere. The sword light traveled over the equator one moment, then returned to the circular base in the far north, brushing past the edge of the protective shield of the ghost city, and then returned to the space, passing through a few black battleships. It was not to show off his skills or to be bored, it was a serious experiment. Shin Yunmai needed time to adapt to the newly installed mechanical arm, and he was also testing a few weapons of the battleship level for the military, and he had a more important mission. As far as the regular folks were concerned, he was the most important young master in the Federation of the Milky Way. As far as the swordsmen were concerned, he was a weirdo, and as far as the military was concerned, he was a fleet. Jingju noticed that the sword light contained a faint light of a different color. He took a closer look at it and was certain that the light came from his waist. That was why. The swordsmen in the starry sky couldn't conquer the starry sky just because they were too far away. Even Jingjiu himself had a hard time traveling across the vast ocean of stars. It was because the permanent stars were too far away, and the fairy energy was not enough. How could a cultivation practitioner travel freely in the universe? The answer was not to ride the battleships, which was the least interesting of all. The real answer was the superparticle transformation of the nuclear power furnaces. The ascendants had been tempered by the fairy energy, so they didn't need to worry about the radiation. The superparticle transformation of the nuclear power furnaces had been the main focus of the scientific circle in the Federation of the Milky Way, but few people knew that it was based on the needs of the ascendants. At least 70 universities of various sects had formed a group to tackle the problem. Though they had made great progress in the past few decades, they hadn't found any useful result. Seeing the experiment conducted by Shin Yunmai, Jingju realized that the miniature nuclear power furnaces had succeeded a long time ago. Thinking of the huge energy furnace he had seen in the passageway at the center of the planet that day, Jingzhou instinctively thought that it had something to do with the miniature nuclear power furnaces. Planet 857 had the most relics of the distant ancient civilization, which could be of great help to the newborn humans. This also explained why the Immortal Tan was willing to take the risk and come here incognito. There were many cultivation states for the Immortal Tan, and the Great Immortal Tan was in heaven and earth. The Immortal Tan was well aware of this, so he wouldn't miss the opportunity to obtain the miniature nuclear power furnaces. The sword light broke through the atmosphere and headed toward the peak of the mountain. The air was compressed at a high speed, giving off a whistling sound. Shin Yunmai halted by the cliff's edge. Noticing Jingju's gaze, he asked, "The experiment has just begun. Do you want to give it a try?" Jingju uttered, without hesitation. Shin Yunmai issued an order to the battleship in the space. A few minutes later, a few highly achieved swordsmen of the military in combat armor flew off the battleship and carried a case into the atmosphere. They landed slowly by the cliff's edge and flew back to the space after putting the case down. The case had a dark gray color, and it was made of a high-density material of the highest standard. It wouldn't be vaporized in a short time even if it was bombarded by a laser cannon. The 857 base had developed a dozen experimental superparticle nuclear power furnaces in secret over the last few years. Only 3 of them had been delivered to the military after a strict inspection. The first one was given to General Li. The second one was carried by Shin Yunmai's waist. The third one was in the case. "It was prepared for you," Shin Yunmai said to Jingjiu. Chapter 865. The superparticle nuclear power furnace was not large, about the length and width of a palm. Its surface was smooth and gloomy, looking like a regular iron box with a belt made of high-strength composite materials. It looked like the exaggerated and ridiculous outfit of an underground boxing champion. It was probably for this reason that Shin Yunmai tied the belt behind his waist and covered it with a white cloth, so that nobody could see it. "Feel it first. I know you people call the photon current the fairy energy. You might think it is not pure and natural enough, but it's actually usable. He took out the nuclear power furnace from the box and walked to the back of Jingjiu, saying, "It's called a wearable equipment. I'm sure you haven't heard of it in your world." The so-called wearable equipment was literally what it meant. However, the technology had developed to such a high level that it was unnecessary for them to do it themselves. The miniature furnace came to the back of Jingjiu. The belt made of high-strength composite materials unfolded automatically and then closed, but the blue hoodie looked a bit ugly. Shin Yunmai shook his head discontentedly, intending to adjust it for Jingjiu. Jingjiu was used to being served by others, no matter if he was in Chaotian or in this world. He always extended his arms horizontally. Yet, Shin Yunmai had never served anyone before. He felt bored after doing it for a while, so he gave up and said, "You do it yourself." The wind blew over Aoyama and came as it pleased. Well, it was indeed inappropriate to use this saying in this world, and when he wore the superparticle nuclear power furnace. All in all, Jingjiu was the sect master of Aoyama. It was impossible that he didn't know how to wear clothes. He took off the blue hoodie. His perfect body exuded a formidable sword will under the dim light. I used a flying sword for a while when I first joined the army, but I found it was not suitable for me. So I changed it to a laser gun, then to a high-energy particle wave generator, and I even tried to use a Haijinren for a while, said Shin Yunmai while looking at Jingjiu. I'm a sword master in Aoyama, but I don't know much about swords. Swords are simple. The joints of the belt made of high-strength composite materials were a bit complicated, and it was made of deformable alloy. It took Jingjiu some time to get used to it. It's not simple. Just like how I still don't understand how you manage to attach yourself to the sword. I'm more familiar with brain-wave transference than anyone else, but, Shin Yunmai remarked sentimentally, I can't believe it has attached itself to a sword. This is very interesting. As Jingjiu set up the miniature stove, he asked casually, "Is it interesting to fight against the sea of dark matter?" A few days ago, the nuclear fleet of the planet arrived at the edge of the sea of dark matter, but an unexpected battle ensued. Even experts like Shin Yunmai and Jingjiu were severely injured. It was easy to imagine how critical the situation was. Normally, since the Federation of the Milky Way couldn't wipe out the sea of dark matter, they shouldn't have any contact with them. It was better to observe them for a long time and destroy as many spores as possible to slow them down. There was no need to take the risk. Shin Yunmai understood what he meant and said, "You have lived for more than 1,000 years. How come you are even more childish than me in terms of politics?" The interstellar fleet consumed more than 80% of the Alliance's resources. If they observed it all year round and didn't see any serious battles, what would the citizens think? How could the military maintain its status? Did he really have to rely on killing people to establish his prestige? That would consume a lot of resources. Jingjiu thought that the Aoyama sect was the leader of the cultivation circle when he was in Chaotian, and the royal family of the Jing clan was the ruler of the human world. They had no need to worry about the distribution of resources or what others thought. You don't have to think too much about what Jingjiu told you today. After all, it will happen 300 years later. Shin Yunmai continued while looking at the starry sky outside the cliff. In fact, I've heard the same thing when I was 11 years old. How did you feel at the time? Asked Jingjiu. Shin Yunmai pulled back his gaze and said to Jingjiu with a faint smile, I was very happy. He had known since his childhood that the sea of dark matter was the greatest threat facing the humans, but it was not the thing he was most afraid of since his childhood. It was because of those things that the young man's spiritual world had gradually turned into a desolate desert. Now that he had suddenly found such an exciting or interesting matter, it was no wonder that he was pleasantly surprised. At the time, I thought I finally had something to do. After I found the method and sequence to ignite those stars and wiped out the sea of dark matter, I would think about and solve the ultimate problem. The smile on Shin Yunmai's face faded away gradually, and the expression in his eyes grew a bit indifferent or numb. But it didn't take me long to ascertain that I couldn't figure it out. The fact that the distant ancient civilization could ignite those stars means that the god was probably a god. Even if we could find the weapon of the planetary state and figure out the sequence and win the war, it would be useless. You know what I mean. There is only one explanation for absolute nihilism: lack of self-confidence. Having made this ruthless comment, Jingju didn't discuss the spiritual issues with Shin Yunmai any further. The supermicroparticle nuclear power furnace was strapped tightly to his waist along with a clicking sound. He put on the blue hoodie again and lifted the hood to cover his face. It was because he had done it so many times that it looked natural and graceful. Sitting by the cliff's edge, Shin Yunmai supported himself with his hands on the ground, enjoying the scene in a comfortable posture. Having finished setting up the miniature furnace, Jingju turned on the switch without hesitation. An extremely subtle and indescribable aura fluctuation was emitted from the miniature furnace. The miniature furnace was situated behind his waist, but the wave came from all directions and landed on the surface of his body. Jingju's body quivered slightly, and then stopped moving immediately. Shin Yunmai noticed the scene, but he didn't think too much about it. He thought that Jingju was a bit nervous. He curled up the corners of his mouth, revealing a knowing smile. The sword heart in the deep part of Jingju's body quivered slightly, as if it had sensed something. The frequency of the wave grew faster and faster until it was synchronized. Jingju was certain that this powerful energy device used the same wireless transmission protocol as the one used by the 857 base the moment he saw the miniature stove, the components and the energy sticks inside. Yet, he didn't expect the energy supply terminal to be in such a special form. If it were generally Shin Yunmai and the others, it would be the sword ghost who was in sync with the energy waves. The synchronization was completed quickly. It took only a few tenths of a millisecond for Jingju to have these thoughts flashing through his mind. An invisible bridge connected the inside and outside of his body. Countless streams of energy kept flowing into his body. What was hard to understand was that the energy, which had the same origin as the fairy energy, did not show the form of light. Jingju sensed the slightest changes in his body and observed the appearance and integration of the fragments of the fairy energy. After making sure there was no problem, he was ready to carry out the next experiment. Be careful when you control your consciousness. Don't overdo it, even if your body has been tempered by the fairy energy and you're a sword devil. Shin Yunmai said, "The line you saw is the self-exploding line. If you're swallowed by the mother nest or infected, remember to use your mind quickly." Jingju confirmed again that he didn't know the experiments done on him by the Science Academy in the laboratory of the Stargate. He only knew that he was the reincarnation of the All-in-One sword, and he only knew the descriptions in the novel. He didn't know more than the other readers. "Take 2 steps, Shin Yunmai suggested. Jingju took 2 steps toward the edge of the cliff. A bright light appeared behind his waist, which looked like a small sun. With a buzzing sound and a gust of wind, Jingju disappeared and flew toward the high night sky. The small sun illuminated the night sky. Even the circular base in the far north could see it. Shin Yunmai looked at the sky and spread his hands, wondering if what he had said before was in vain. The superparticulate nuclear power furnace was indeed excellent. It was perfect in all aspects, but it had one disadvantage: it was too bright. If an ascendant used this kind of miniature furnace, he would easily become a firefly in the night sky and become the focus of attention and the target of malice. It seemed that the red cloak worn by General Li was not made to look handsome. It was made of a special material that could completely block out the light. As he was thinking of all this, Jingju had flown more than 10,000 miles away. He broke through the atmosphere and arrived in the space. Once again, he felt that the blue hoodie was not suitable for him. The friction of the atmosphere and the overflowing energy of the miniature furnace were both irresistible to the blue hoodie. By the time he stopped, his clothes had been burned into nothingness. There was nothing left. A sword light rushed over from afar. Shin Yunmai came to Jingjio's side. His white clothes were also burned away. "Is this the nature you pursue?" asked Jingjio. Shin Yunmai shot him a glance and said, "You are quite natural at the moment." Jingjio looked at him in silence, not uttering a word. A moment later, Shin Yunmai understood what Jingjio meant and turned his face away. The 857 planet and the circular base were the most important secrets of the military. They were strictly guarded. Only a few battleships were qualified to enter the galaxy. At the moment, only the Scorching Sun battleship and the two battleships named the Scorching Tail battleship anchored at the periphery of the distant galaxy. For some reason, the two battleships adjusted their positions at the same time, just like Shin Yunmai. The star was very dim, and its light was so weak that it could not illuminate anything. But the two streaks of white light were still very conspicuous against the dark background of the universe. The two battleships sailed slowly toward the shadowy area of the farthest planet. They removed all the monitoring devices to ensure that they would not capture any images related to the two battleships. The silence that engulfed the entire galaxy was not because Jingjio was embarrassed. He had encountered this kind of situation many times, so he was used to it. Shin Yunmai turned his face away, not because he was embarrassed to look at Jingjio. The silence was due to something else, something that was more embarrassing. Since their clothes were going to be burned away anyway, they adjusted their positions for a long time at the edge of the cliff. Two beams of sword light illuminated the dim universe. One of the beams of sword light turned into a dazzling sun from time to time. After a long while, the two beams of sword light disappeared at the same time. A desolate small planet was moving soundlessly not far from the star. In a few years, it would fall into the star and become a scenery that no one could see. If it were a normal galaxy, this small planet should be extremely hot. But it was very cold at the moment because of the spores on the surface of the star. Jingjio and Shin Yunmai landed on the surface of the small planet. Shin Yunmai took out a small wine bottle and handed it to Jingjio. Jingjio shot a glance at him. Shin Yunmai said, "It's strong enough. Try it." The wine in this small wine bottle was obviously different from the wine in the clay jar that night. It was not because of the difference in the type of wine, but the difference in the contents. The active ingredient of this wine was not alcohol, but a chemical drug. This kind of drug was an illegal product in all the administrative districts of the Federation of the Milky Way. A small bottle of this drug could drive thousands of drug addicts crazy or even kill them. "I'm not good at it," said Jingjio. Chapter 866. Having said that, Jingjio continued looking at him in silence. Shin Yunmai did not think that Jingjio was trying to educate him, which was a bad behavior, nor did he think that Jingjio would report him to the Military Justice Department. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "You've never seen someone as beautiful as me?" "The surface of the lake, the mirror, and the surface of the battleship," Jingjio answered casually. These were all objects that could reflect his face. Shin Yunmai said with slight annoyance, "Then, you must have never seen someone as perfect as me." "I'm looking at where you hid the flagon," Jingjio said with an indifferent expression. Shin Yunmai was naked at the moment. Apart from the miniature stove tied to his waist, there was not even a leaf on his body. Where did the small flagon come from? There was only one explanation, and that was that the Ascenders had also brought things like spatial artifacts into this universe. Shin Yunmai smiled faintly and reached out his left earlobe, where there was a silver earring. The silver earring was small and delicate, so it was not easy to notice. There was another reason why Jingjio had not noticed the uniqueness of the earring in the last few days. Due to certain reasons, He seldom paid attention to the ears since his rebirth, regardless of whether it was someone else's or his own. Shin Yunmai said with raised eyebrows, "Look at your big earring. It's still missing a piece. It's not as perfect as mine." Jingjiu did not want to pay attention to him. Seeing that Jingjiu did not take the wine, Shin Yunmai opened the cork and poured the wine into his mouth. The gravity on the small planet was very weak, so the wine fell very slowly. It stretched into a smooth curve and fell directly into Shin Yunmai's mouth. A moment later, a trace of confusion appeared in his eyes, but it soon disappeared. Jingjiu had not done any experiments on this subject, and it was impossible for the clinical data of Shin Yunmai to be found on the Star Zone network. "Are hallucinogenic drugs useful?" he asked. Shin Yunmai closed his eyes and shook his head quickly like a puppy after a bath. When he opened his eyes, he had already calmed down. "Suppressing one's consciousness to the lowest level can produce a little effect," he said in a somewhat bored tone. "It's boring," Jingjiu said. "If the big mouthful of wine was diluted and made into medicine, it could supply the needs of a holiday planet for a whole year." However, Shin Yunmai only had a slight reaction. He smiled bitterly and said, "This is already the latest and most powerful one. There aren't many things that can stimulate my brain." Neither the military justice department nor the police department could control him, and these drugs could not harm him. In a sense, he and Jingjiu were no longer human. Without ideals and goals, there was no meaning in living. They were just like dead salted fish. This most common description was the most suitable for them. The dead salted fish did not care about being exposed to the sun, steamed, salted, or eaten, because it did not feel anything. It was the same for many cultivators. They had other goals in Chaotian. If you want to become an immortal as a human, you have to ascend to the heavens even if you were born on Earth. But what if they really succeeded in ascending and reached the sky? There was no immortal realm here, no higher goal, only a cold and vast universe. This universe was unimaginably large, as if it had no boundary. It was large enough to dilute all the ambitions and destroy all the goals, including the feelings. Many people know that I like those kinds of things. Many people wrote about me on the internet and even composed songs to sing them, saying that I'm a pioneer of the ancient style. Your ass. Why do I like those kinds of things? You should have guessed that I'm very interested in your world. Shin Yunmai took another mouthful of wine and continued, "It's not an exaggeration to say that I yearn for it. The reason is simple. I have to know where I came from in order to accept where I'm going. As a result, those old guys don't tell me where Chaotian is, because they're afraid that I'll act recklessly." Jingjiu could understand the concern of the Grand Master and the immortal Chunyang. If Shin Yunmai went to Chaotian, he would cause a great disturbance, and many people would die. The arrangement of that god would be greatly affected. Yet, Jingjiu was not as worried as the Grand Master and the immortal Chunyang were. It was because Shin Yunmai was smart even though he was crazy. Jingjiu pointed to a corner of the universe and said, "Over there." Shin Yunmai put down the small wine bottle and looked in the direction of Jingjiu's finger. Finally, he found the dim white permanent star. Looking at the permanent star, he said after a long moment of silence, "I'd like to go there and have a look." Jingjiu said, "If you go there, it'll be hard for you to come out." Shin Yunmai said expressionlessly, "I've heard them talking about it, but it's illogical and unreasonable." Jingjiu said, "It should be the interference of the superimposed waves of reality on the quantum level." Staring at the distant sun, Shin Yunmai said, "Don't think you can act like a hooligan just because you're naked. At least 3 ascendants have returned to Chaotian from the universe, and they can't ascend a second time. This is why Byron hesitated back then. Your father and the other ascendants like the immortal Chunyang don't dare go back there or even get close to it. Besides the threat of the sea of dark matter, they are also worried about this issue. The non-romantic story about the butterfly and the ocean referred to the same principle. The people on the inside can come out, but the people on the outside can't go in. It's because they are the people on the outside once they come out. Jingjiu gave a more enigmatic and hooligan reason. Shin Yunmai turned around and said to Jingjiu, "You've come out before." Jingjiu said, "I'm born as a sword from my spiritual soul, so it's different. I can also give up my body." Shin Yunmai said this casually. He was influenced by the spiritual soul when he came to the 857 base for the first time when he was very young, so he gave up his arm. Later, he gave up other parts of his body, including his internal organs. It was not a difficult choice for him to make. Jingjiu reminded him, "There's something wrong with your brain." General Li had also said that Shin Yunmai had something wrong with his brain, but what he said was different from what he meant. What he meant was that the spiritual soul or awareness of a regular human was attached to the brain. Shin Yunmai could give up his entire body, but he couldn't give up his brain. No matter what state one's cultivation state was, even if one was an ascendant ferryman, the Yuanying and the sword ghost would dissipate very quickly in heaven and earth after they left their bodies. In a sense, this indirectly proved that the Yuanying, the sword ghost and the demonic thoughts were the combination of the spiritual wave. Even if one employed a magic method or a demonic method to help these spiritual waves find a target to possess, it would be a gradual process that couldn't be reversed. If the spiritual soul could be inherited perfectly, immortality would be a simple matter. As such, Taiping Jinren wouldn't be in such a hurry to complete his important task. "We still have to find a way to go there," said Shin Yunmai. It was dark in the space. The distant white permanent star seemed to be getting closer and clearer in their sight. Through the flight test, the latest data of the superparticulate nuclear power furnace had been obtained. Before the results of the analysis from the circular base, Jingjiu had calculated that the miniature furnace could help him travel back and forth between the 857 planet and the main planet 10 times in a row if he were to use the space-class armor, and it would be easy for him to return to Chaotian. "We'll think about it later," said Jingjiu. Shin Yunmai continued, "What are you going to do? Stay in the 857 base and think about how to ignite those permanent stars? Or go back to the main planet to find that person and soak in the hot spring? Or go back to the Stargate to look at the oil paintings?" "Where are you going?" asked Jingjiu. Shin Yunmai said, "I'm the commander of the Central Star Fleet, so I have to go to the front line. There's something I need to take care of. If everything goes well, I'll be able to see some rare sceneries on my way back." "What sceneries?" asked Jingjiu. Shin Yunmai said, "The heavenly ruler galaxy is on the verge of being engulfed." "I'll go there to have a look," said Jingjiu. Although it was a last-minute decision, it was destined that this trip would not be a sudden one. Jingjiu was the chief advisor of the military, and Shin Yunmai was the commander of the Central Star Fleet. Their status and importance in the human society were unimaginably high. If they left secretly, it would cause an unimaginable uproar. Even though they wanted to avoid trouble, they had to follow the normal procedure. The normal procedure didn't mean that they had to wait for the approval. Their authority was so high that nobody had the authority and qualification to approve their trip, including General Li. The process mentioned here referred to packing and dealing with some matters. After they returned to the circular base, Jingjiu told Hua Shi about it and asked her if she wanted to take a look at the superparticulate nuclear power furnace. Hua Shi looked at him with a strange expression, but she didn't refuse. She had completed many of the calculations for the nuclear power furnace, and it was her first time seeing it in real life. Jingjiu left the room and walked along the passageway of the base, ready to go to the center of the earth to take a look at the starry sky and have a few words with Tsingju. When he passed by a laboratory, he put his hands behind his back. After a long time, the light outside the window gradually dimmed. Professor Long walked out of the laboratory, ready to take a short rest. He walked to the window and looked at a black tree outside. He patted the wall next to the window with his right hand and sighed. The scene, coupled with his sparse hair and broad forehead, gave off a sense of vicissitudes of life. The wall in the circular base was made of super-strong alloy, which was hard beyond imagination. It was extremely smooth and had close to zero friction. Even a mosquito wouldn't be able to stand steadily on it with a walking stick. It was unknown why his hand didn't slip. Chapter 867. The conversation between Jing Jiu and Tsing Ju at the center of the earth had no practical content. Since Sage Tsing had ascertained that Yamatsai's situation was similar to what was described in the book, he paid no more attention to it, nor did he ask Jing Jiu who Hejan's father was. It should be noted that this was one of the most interesting puzzles among the readers of the Path toward Heaven and the players of the game. Jing Jiu wasn't interested in the starry sky either. Though the real-time monitoring system was quite advanced, and all the stars in the galaxy could be seen clearly and comprehensively after filtering out all kinds of interferences, it was still not real. So, the question was, what was real? For people like Jing Jiu and Shen Yunmai, this seemingly meaningless question was their main thought activity. But they had no one to talk to, and there was no need to. It was probably for this reason that they didn't start a bloody battle the moment they met and fight until the end of the universe like in other stories. After returning to the room, Jing Jiu saw Hua Shi take out a black backpack, feeling somewhat surprised. This black backpack was quite similar to the one he had used before, but the material was obviously different. It's made of super microparticles. The strap is made of the same material as the belt, which can withstand super-wide energy waves. In other words, you can put the nuclear power furnace in the backpack instead of tying it to your waist. Hua Shi continued, there are a few clothes in the backpack made of the same material. They should be able to last for a while. Jing Jiu understood the meaning of clothes, but he didn't understand the backpack, wondering what was wrong with tying it to his waist. Seeing his expression, Hua Shi knew what he was thinking, saying, if you tie it to your waist, you'll look very stupid. Jing Jiu hadn't paid much attention to this aspect. He searched for it in the database and agreed with her after seeing the pictures. Early in the morning, a transport spaceship left the circular base and broke through the atmosphere, heading toward the periphery of the galaxy with its back to the dim permanent star. A sword light had already left earlier. Dozens of officers and researchers of the base stood on the grass and watched the ship leave. For some reason, the young officer didn't leave with them. He stood in a dark corner of the suite, gazing at the faces of the officers and researchers through the French window, as if he were scrutinizing something. It didn't take long for the spaceship to arrive at the periphery of the galaxy and enter the scorching sun battleship. Jing Jiu stood in front of the familiar giant window, and Hua Shi was brewing tea behind him. A black battleship floated in the universe outside the window in silence. The polycrystalline engine at the rear of the battleship emitted a faint blue light. The gravitational field generator at the side of the ring began to distort the starlight and had already entered the activated state. This black battleship was very similar to the one he had destroyed in the Hyene Nebula. It had an inauspicious name, Jiao Wei. The Scorching Tail battleship was Shen Yunmai's battleship, just like the Scorching Sun battleship was his battleship. According to the military tradition of the Federation, this relationship would last until they retired or died. Another secret tradition was that if he or Shen Yunmai died in the battle in the starry sky, the two warships would follow them to the galaxy, no matter how they died. Such an ancient and pedantic habit had been preserved until the era of interstellar civilization. This was something that Jing Jiu could not understand. Whether it was when he first saw these materials in the library of the Shershin Academy or now. The Scorching Sun battleship started up slowly along with the slight vibrations and low-frequency sounds that couldn't be heard by ordinary people. Soon after, the Scorching Tail battleship started up as well. It was a slow process for the battleship to accelerate. The black permanent star stayed behind for a long time before it completely disappeared from the field of vision. There was no emotion of parting. Jingju knew that he would come back to this place. The two huge battleships were tens of thousands of miles away from each other, but they seemed to be traveling side by side, as if they were two athletes standing at the starting line and setting off at the same time. It didn't take long for the Scorching Tail battleship to surpass the Scorching Sun battleship by one body length. Then, the Scorching Tail battleship sped up until it suddenly disappeared at the entrance of the warped black hole. Along with various mechanical sounds, the Scorching Sun battleship was loaded with the composite material partitions, ready to enter the warped black hole. Looking at the invisible door in the universe ahead, Jingju wondered what would happen if he barged into the warped black hole without using the universal armor. If he closed his eyes, shut off his six senses, and restrained his sword wills, would he not cause any spatial fluctuations, just like the Scorching Sun battleship? The Scorching Sun battleship passed through the warped black hole safely without any air fluctuation. The Scorching Tail battleship was waiting in silence a million miles ahead. The whole process was indescribable. Neither the computer system of the battleship nor those living beings on the battleship knew what the passageway looked like. Human spaceships had passed through the warped black hole at least trillions of times, and it had been going on for more than 100,000 years. But it was no different from the first time, which made people feel helpless, tired, and numb. Knowing the way but not knowing the reason was the most accurate description of this phenomenon, and also the most merciless ridicule. However, it was not so hard to accept that primitive humans didn't know what fire was even though they had been using it for hundreds of thousands of years. After a long voyage of more than 10 days, and passing through 4 warped black holes, the two battleships arrived in a relatively strange universe. The deep voice of the captain of the Scorching Sun battleship rang out, ordering all the officers and men on the battleship to take off their military hats, except for those who were at the necessary positions, and face a certain place in the universe to mourn. Before this, Jingzhou had already looked at that place and saw a spectacular and yet extremely tragic scene. It was a broken planet. At least 1/3 of the planet had been blasted into the universe by some kind of powerful explosion, forming an irregular meteorite belt. Traces of boiling lava could be seen at the edge of the huge gap on the planet, and the internal structure of the planet was in an extremely disordered state. Looking at it from the battleship in the distance, the planet looked like a human tooth that had been pulled out by force, or a ping-pong ball that had been burned by fire. If there had been any life on this planet, they would have been killed in the explosion, regardless of whether they were humans or cockroaches. Jingzhou said something to Hua Shi, and then flew out of the battleship. A moment later, a sword light flew out from the Scorching Tail battleship, following Jingzhou to the space not far from the broken planet. The two battleships slowed down slowly, adjusted their positions, and turned off all the monitoring devices. "There's a rumor that a planet has been destroyed by the military," said Jingzhou. This was a rumor that had been circulating on the Star Zone network for a long time. Jingzhou had read some reliable statements in the hidden network. Shin Yunmai said, "The rumors that are not open to the public are usually true." "How many people were on this planet?" asked Jingzhou. 31,620,000, replied Shin Yunmai. Upon hearing this number, the broken planet became even more deathly still in Jingzhou's eyes. Deathly still was not the same as desolation. It was not because there were no buildings or traces of human activities. There were countless planets in the universe that were desolated, devoid of anything, but they were not deathly still. It was because no one had ever visited them or seen them. This broken planet used to have people and a flourishing civilization, but it had become what it was now. This was the so-called deathly still. What kind of weapon could destroy 1/3 of a planet with a single strike? Jingjiu thought of the catastrophe that had befallen Planet 857 and asked, was it a weapon left by the distant ancient civilization? This planet was an important mineral planet 70 years ago, and the mining company belonged to the Hua family. After the investigation, it was found that the Hua family had violated the rules by using a certain high-energy field tool, which led to the appearance of the cracks in the dimensional space. In the beginning, only a few dozen miners and some rock rats were infected. If they had been properly isolated, this wouldn't have happened. Shin Yunmai didn't answer Jingju's question directly, but began to narrate the story of the past. Jingju didn't ask what had happened next. Similar stories had occurred many times in the history of mankind. The top management of the mining company or even the Hua family had disobeyed the military's orders and wanted to escape as soon as possible, which led to this catastrophe. The commander of the fleet stationed in this part of the planet was a cocoon breaker, the immortal Qi Song, who was killed by Yu. Shen Yunmai continued. His methods were too forceful, which led to the rapid escalation of the situation and made it difficult to control. Over 70,000 spaceships, big and small, were ready to leave in one night. Who gave the final order? Asked Jingjiu. Looking at the broken planet, Shin Yunmai said after a moment of silence, my father. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.